Hello friends, I am Mr. Ghost, and I am here to help you today. I know, you use these videos to fall asleep. So, before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from, and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable, and relax. It started with a low hum above my ceiling. At first, I thought it might be a pipe problem, or some wiring issue. I was used to weird sounds in old buildings. But this hum wasn't like the usual clangs or creaks. It felt closer. It felt intentional. I remember standing in my living room, looking up, and waiting for it to go away. It never did. It just lingered, soft and constant, like someone was breathing right above me. That was my first clue that something was off. I didn't know yet how bad it would get. I've lived in this apartment for 5 years, and I've always heard rumors that the upstairs floor was empty. The landlord told me it had been vacant for a long time. The hallway leading to that unit was always dark, and the door at the top was sealed from the outside with a rusted chain. Nobody ever talked about it, and I never saw anyone going up there. People came and went from the other floors, but the top floor stayed quiet. I used to think it was just a space the owners never bothered to renovate, but then I started hearing voices. My bedroom is right under where that sealed apartment should be. The first time I heard the whispers, I was half asleep. I rolled over in bed and checked my phone. It was a little past midnight. I was annoyed because it sounded like muffled talking, but I couldn't make out words. I tried to ignore it. I stuffed a pillow over my ear and hoped I'd drift back off. The next night at the exact same time, I heard it again. This time I sat up in bed. My heart pounded and I listened carefully. It wasn't just random mumbling. There was a pattern to it, like someone was speaking in short bursts. I got out of bed and pressed my ear to the ceiling. The voice was hushed, but it had a rhythm, like a chant without any real melody. I remember my skin crawling because the tone sounded close to my ear, as if the speaker were just on the other side. On the third night, my curiosity beat my nerves. I climbed out of bed at exactly midnight. My hands were shaking because I anticipated that voice. Sure enough, right on schedule, I heard it again. My heart thumped in my chest, and I felt my mouth go dry. I grabbed a flashlight from my nightstand and decided to check upstairs. There was no logic in waiting anymore. I wanted to prove to myself that nobody was there. Maybe it was just a pipe or the wind. I pulled on a pair of jeans, a sweatshirt, and quietly crept into the hallway. The elevator in my building is ancient, so I took the stairs. I reached the second floor landing and noticed how dark the corridor was. The overhead lights flickered sometimes, but that night they were out entirely. The air felt thicker, and it smelled stale like old cardboard left in a damp basement. I aimed my flashlight at the chain door. The chain was there, but it looked loose, as if someone had undone a link. I got closer and noticed the door was slightly ajar. That alone should have made me turn around, but I couldn't. I felt a pull. It was as if something up there wanted me to come. My breathing quickened and sweat gathered on my forehead. My legs felt unsteady, but I placed my hand on the door and pushed. It opened onto a long corridor. At first, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The hallway stretched much farther than the building's blueprint allowed. My building is old, but it's not gigantic. There should have been a short hallway leading to 1 or 2 apartments instead. Instead, I saw a narrow passage with a bunch of doors on either side, each spaced out evenly. The flashlight beam only showed me a portion of it, but even then I could tell something was wrong. I looked behind me. The stairwell was right there. Part of me wanted to go back, but I couldn't. I stepped inside. The floor creaked under my feet. The wallpaper was faded and peeling, as if no one had been there for decades. A stale odor like rotting wood hovered in the air. I ran my hand along the wall. The paint felt crumbly, and flakes came off on my fingers. I swallowed hard and moved forward, trying to keep my footsteps light. My own breathing sounded too loud in that space. I stopped in front of the first door on my left. It was made of dark wood with a tarnished brass knob. There was no label or number. Something inside me said not to touch it, but I placed my ear against it anyway. At first I heard nothing. Then I caught a faint thumping like someone tapping the door from the other side. My pulse raced. I backed away, shining my flashlight at the door. The tapping grew louder and sounded like a steady rhythm, almost matching the pace of my heartbeat. I took 2 steps back, wondering if I should try the knob, but I felt this deep dread, so I moved on. The next door was identical. Dark wood, a brass knob. Again, I put my ear to it. This time I heard something like heavy breathing, in and out, steady and slow. It didn't sound labored, but it was definitely not an empty room. I jerked back, pointing my flashlight at the crack where the door met the floor. I expected to see a shadow or movement, but the space underneath was pitch black. I stayed there for a few seconds, then forced myself to keep walking. I passed a few more doors without stopping. I could hear soft knocking and more of that whispering. My spine tingled and my skin felt clammy. My flashlight started to flicker, so I smacked it a few times to keep it steady. Something about this corridor felt unnatural. It was too long, and every door seemed to have something behind it. The building I live in doesn't have hallways like this. There shouldn't be multiple apartments on this floor. Yet here I was, walking deeper into a place that seemed to have no end. Eventually I saw a faint glow at the far end. It looked like light seeping out from under the last door. My chest felt tight and I had to remind myself to breathe. Every step closer, I felt like the walls were closing in. My shoulders felt heavy. My head started to pound. I got closer and heard the same voice I'd heard from my bedroom ceiling. It sounded clearer now, like it was coming from behind that door. I realized it was saying something that almost sounded like my name. It wasn't exact, but it was close enough to make my stomach twist. I stood in front of that final door for what felt like a long time, though it was probably only a few seconds. The light underneath was a dull, pale color. I gripped the knob. It felt colder than ice. I turned it and pushed. The door resisted. It felt jammed. I pushed again, harder. Finally, it swung inward with a groan. My flashlight beam lit up a completely bare room. The walls were plain, the floor was plain, and there was a single window that showed a black sky. I walked inside, scanning every corner. There was no furniture, no person, nothing. Still, the voice continued. It sounded like it came from the ceiling again. I looked up and saw a crack in the plaster. Dust sprinkled down. The voice grew louder, more frantic. I stepped directly beneath the crack and tried to see if there was an attic or another hidden space. The whispering turned into muttering, almost like chanting. I shouted, "Who's there?" My voice echoed around the empty room. My flashlight flickered again, and for a second everything went dark. When the light came back on, the chanting stopped. The room was dead silent. I stood there panting, trying to figure out what to do next. My heart was racing, and I felt an urge to run. But the door behind me slammed shut on its own. I jumped and spun around, shining my flashlight on it. I tried the knob, but it wouldn't budge. Then I heard pounding from the hallway coming from all the other doors. It was like a chorus of fists hitting wood in a steady rhythm. Sweat dripped down my face. I tried to open the door again, twisting and pulling with all my strength. It held firm. Behind me, something scraped against the floor. I whipped around, shining my flashlight in that direction. The center of the room had a fresh crack in the floorboards. It looked like something underneath was pushing upward. My stomach lurched, and I felt a wave of panic. I ran to the window, hoping it might open or at least give me a way out. When I pressed my hands against the glass, I realized it was too dark to see anything outside. It was like a black void. I could see my reflection in the glass, my eyes wide with terror, but nothing else. I grabbed the frame and tried to slide it open. It was stuck. The pounding from the hallway got louder, like every door was under attack. My ears rang with the sound of fists hitting wood. My lungs felt tight. I yelled for help, even though I was sure nobody else was around. My flashlight started flickering more frequently, giving me only brief flashes of the room. Each time it flickered, that crack in the floor seemed wider. Finally, my flashlight died completely, and I stood there in darkness, hearing my own ragged breathing and the relentless pounding outside. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and activated the flashlight function. The light wasn't strong, but it was enough to see that the crack now ran across half the room. My phone battery was at 30% and felt like it was dropping fast. I took a step toward the door, thinking maybe I could force it open. As I passed over the crack, I heard a hollow echo beneath my feet. The floor felt unstable, like it might give at any moment. I placed my hand on the doorknob again, and yanked as hard as I could. It didn't move. My muscles were trembling. My breaths were shallow. I pressed my phone to the knob to see if there was some lock mechanism I could pick or break. It was an old knob, the kind without a modern keyhole. No lock there. I slammed my fist against the door and yelled to whoever might hear, The pounding from outside still matched my blows. There was a pattern to it, like the entire hallway was mimicking me. Just then, the whispering returned. It was faint but unmistakable. It came from behind me again, somewhere above the crack in the ceiling. My throat went dry. I turned around, phone flashlight held up. Dust was falling in tiny clouds. The ceiling had hairline fractures all over and looked ready to collapse. I felt trapped. My body tingled with adrenaline, my legs weak, but I forced myself to walk back to the center of the room. I stared up at the ceiling. The whispering got louder, sounding like it was calling to me, though not in a language I recognized. My heart pounded and I felt dizzy. I don't know why, but I shouted, "What do you want?" No response. The voice just kept whispering. The floor creaked beneath my feet. I knelt down, shining my phone at the crack in the floorboards. There was only darkness down there, but I thought I heard movement like scraping or shuffling. My mind raced. I felt cornered. The door was stuck. The window sealed. The ceiling and floor both seemed ready to break apart. The pounding outside grew even louder. It sounded like the doors in the hallway were being hit by a battering ram. The sound echoed inside my chest, made my stomach twist. My phone battery read. I was sweating so much that my shirt clung to my back. I took a step away from the center of the room, pressing myself against the wall near the window. My mind kept bouncing between fear and desperation. I tried calling someone, anyone, but had no signal. The phone screen showed no bars. That never happened in my apartment before. I stared at that crack in the ceiling, expecting it to burst open at any second. A part of me thought about trying to break through the drywall or kick down the door. But my body felt heavy and my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. The whispering grew into a low moan and I felt it reverberate in my chest. I screamed in frustration and charged at the door. I slammed my shoulder into it, ignoring the pain that shot down my arm. It didn't budge. The pounding in the hallway stopped for a moment, like it was waiting to see what I'd do next. My phone was now at. My heart hammered. I tried to think about anything else I could use. Maybe the window glass could be broken. I grabbed the flashlight from my belt, realizing it was dead, but I could still use it as a blunt object. I swung it at the window with everything I had. The glass didn't crack, and the impact sent a shock through my arm. I tried again. Nothing. It was like hitting solid steel. Behind me, the floor creaked. I heard the board snap. A jolt of terror ran through me. I spun around, shining my phone's flashlight at the floor. The crack had widened, and I saw a gap big enough to fit my foot through. It looked like there was a dark void below, as if the building's foundation was missing. My hands shook so much that my phone light wobbled. The board shifted slightly, and I thought they might collapse if I moved too much. Then the hallway pounding started again, loud and fast. It felt like an army was outside, hammering on every door. My eyes darted around the room, searching for another way out. I spotted a small vent near the ceiling on the far side. It was one of those older vents that might lead into some crawl space. I made my way around the edges of the room, trying not to step on any weak spots. I reached the vent, stood on my toes, and tried to see if I could pull the cover off. It was held on by screws, but I had nothing to unscrew them. I tugged, but it wouldn't come off. My phone flashed a warning, 5% battery left. My adrenaline surged, and I tried the door one last time, throwing all my weight against it. The knob rattled, but it held firm. I couldn't stop shaking. My mind kept returning to the question, how is this corridor even here? It shouldn't exist. My building doesn't have space for a hallway this long or this room, but I knew I was definitely in it. The faint smell of rot and dust filled my nostrils. The chain outside had been undone. Something had led me here. The whispering changed pitch and got louder, echoing off the walls. The pounding outside became a steady pulsating beat. My phone was at. My hands were clammy, and my arm hurt from hitting the door. I felt like the walls were inching closer. I took a deep breath, raised my phone's flashlight to the ceiling one more time, and stepped back to the center of the room, ignoring the crack as best I could. The voice was so loud it felt like it was right in my ear. My heart pounded in my skull and I yelled, "Stop!" But the whispering didn't stop. I felt the floor shift under my weight. The board creaked, and I nearly lost my balance. The phone flashlight flickered, then shut off. Total darkness. My body went rigid. The only sounds were my own breathing and that relentless pounding in the hallway. Then I felt a breeze on my face, like air was being sucked in from somewhere below. I stumbled backward, groping in the dark. My fingers found the doorknob again, but it was colder than before. I tried to open it, half expecting it would now that I was on the brink of collapsing. It stayed locked. I pressed my forehead against the door, swallowing hard. My throat was so dry it hurt. The pounding outside reached a fever pitch, and the whispering rose to match it. It felt like the air itself was vibrating. I pulled away from the door and crouched, hands over my ears. My breath came in gasps. My legs felt weak and my skin was damp with cold sweat. The floor trembled and the boards under me let out a sharp crack. I clenched my teeth, stood up, and with one last surge of desperation, slammed my body into the door. The doorknob twisted in my hand. The door gave way, and I stumbled into the corridor. The pounding stopped. I almost fell to my knees, but forced myself to stay upright. I looked around, trying to see by the dim emergency light that flickered at the far end of the hall. Every door in the corridor was closed, and the noise from behind them had vanished. My heart was still racing, and my clothes were soaked in sweat. I took a few unsteady steps toward the direction I had come from. I saw the open entrance where I had first walked in. I made my way back, each step echoing in the silent hallway. The chain on the entry door dangled, broken in the middle. My hands shook as I pushed the door. It opened easily. I hurried through it and found myself back on the stairwell. The normal building light was now on, that dingy yellow glow. My chest felt tight, and my breathing was shallow. I looked back at the door. It was closed, but there was no sign of the chain. I didn't wait around. I ran down the stairs as fast as I could, nearly tripping on each step. By the time I reached my apartment, I was soaked with sweat and shaking. I locked my door and sat on the floor, struggling to calm my racing heart. I stayed there for what felt like hours, hugging my knees, trying to convince myself that I hadn't lost my mind. I could still feel that cold doorknob in my hand, hear that pounding in my ears. Every hair on my body stood on end whenever I recalled the whispers. My apartment felt small and safe compared to that impossible hallway. Even now, I don't know what to believe. There shouldn't be any space above me. There shouldn't be any corridor with locked doors. Thought I was there. I touched those walls. I heard the tapping, the chanting, the knocking. I don't know if it's real or if my mind snapped, but every night at midnight, I swear I can still hear that low hum in the ceiling. And every night I wonder if that door upstairs is still open, waiting for me to come back. I found out I inherited a Victorian mansion from an uncle I never met. A lawyer called me on a Monday morning and said my name was on the will. I signed the papers a few days later, packed up my apartment, and drove 6 hours to see the place. When I first walked up to the mansion, I was struck by how large it looked. Tall windows lined the front, and dark spires rose from the roof. The paint on the walls had chipped off in places. The front porch creaked under my feet, and I smelled damp wood when I pressed my face against the old door. I unlocked the door and stepped into a hallway with a high ceiling. A single light bulb flickered above me. I saw a wide staircase to my left and a corridor to my right. The floorboards groaned with each step. I took a moment to catch my breath, set my suitcase down, and felt a chill run down my arms, even though I wore a jacket. The air inside felt colder than the outside air. I swallowed and walked into the main living room, which had heavy drapes that blocked out most of the sunlight. There was a couch with torn upholstery in the corner, and a coffee table covered with dust. A fireplace stood against the far wall but looked like it hadn't been used in a long time. The house felt silent, yet I sensed something in the walls, like the place wasn't empty. The next day, I woke up in one of the upstairs bedrooms. I had chosen a room that didn't smell too musty. It had a bed frame, a mattress, and a dresser, although everything felt old and unclean. I didn't hear any traffic outside because the mansion was far from town. The silence pressed down on me. I thought I heard faint tapping behind the walls, but I couldn't be sure. I spent the morning exploring. The dining room had a long table with chairs pushed in at odd angles. The kitchen had a non-functioning fridge, a stove, and cupboards filled with cobwebs. I cleared out enough space on the counter to make myself a sandwich from the groceries I brought. After lunch, I noticed the hallway felt colder than the living room. I thought maybe there was a draft coming in from somewhere. I tried to check the windows for cracks, but I didn't see any obvious gaps. I turned up the small space heater I brought with me, but it didn't change the temperature much. My fingers felt stiff, I rubbed my hands together and moved into the living room to see if that felt any better. That space had a different temperature. The living room felt cool, but not as bitter. It was strange, but I shrugged it off. Old houses can have weird insulation problems. Still, I felt uneasy. At night, I listened for sounds. I lay in bed and waited. Around midnight, I heard a faint rustling noise. It came from somewhere near the walls. It sounded like someone whispering, but I couldn't make out words. My name seemed to form in my head, but I thought that was just my imagination. I flicked on the lamp, walked across the room, and pressed my ear to the wall. The sound stopped. I stepped back, and my pulse pounded in my ears. Then, a few seconds later, I heard it again, but this time it seemed to come from a different part of the house. I grabbed the flashlight from my nightstand and walked into the hallway. It was so dark that my flashlight barely cut through the shadows. My steps echoed. I called out, "Is someone there?" There was no response. I felt my heart beating fast. I clutched the flashlight and walked back to my bedroom. I locked the door behind me. Even though I felt a little silly, I barely slept that night. Over the next few days, I realized each room had its own climate. The living room stayed cool. The kitchen felt normal. The master bedroom felt drafty, and the attic was horribly stuffy. I went up there to poke around. When I opened the attic door, the air felt thick and stale. My chest felt tight. I turned on the old light hanging from the ceiling. I saw trunks, boxes, and old furniture piled around me. I started digging through a chest near the door and found old clothes and papers. Some were receipts and letters addressed to my uncle. That's how I confirmed he used to spend time up there. Everything smelled of dust. I had a hard time breathing, so I didn't stay long. I got a headache and returned downstairs. I wanted to figure out why the house felt so off. I thought maybe the wiring or plumbing had something to do with it. I wandered around the first floor, checking corners and walls for pipes or vents. While I was in the hallway next to the dining room, I heard a weird clank behind the paneling. The noise was soft, like metal against wood. I pressed my ear to the wall and heard another series of taps. I knocked on the wall. A cold sensation rushed through my body and I got goosebumps. I couldn't explain why. I remember whispering to myself, "There's nothing behind here." But deep down I felt there was something. 2 days later, I started noticing that the corridors felt longer than they had before. When I walked down the main hallway, I counted the steps. At first it was about 15 steps from one end to the other, but on that day, it took me closer to 20 steps. I thought maybe I miscounted or got turned around. I tried again, counting carefully, and I got 18 steps. I shook my head in frustration. I wasn't sure if the house was playing tricks on me or if my mind was. I tested a different hallway on the second floor, and the same thing happened. The distance seemed to shift. I felt sweat on my forehead, and my mouth went dry. I hurried back to the bedroom and closed the door. I sat on the bed for a while, breathing hard. I wanted to leave, but I also wanted to understand what was happening. Later that afternoon, I found a few loose floorboards in one of the smaller bedrooms on the second floor. There was a corner where the boards creaked more than usual. I crouched down and pried them up with a flathead screwdriver I found in the old toolbox in the closet. Under the boards, I saw a stack of folders tied together with string. I pulled them out and wiped off a layer of dust. Each folder had paranormal phenomena stamped on the top. Inside, there were typewritten reports describing strange occurrences around the property. I saw references to voices in the walls, changes in temperature, flickering lights, and people hearing their names whispered. My uncle's name appeared in several of the notes. They mentioned that he had tried to contact someone about these events, but never got a response. Some pages had scribbled notes in the margins describing faint outlines of figures in doorways. The handwriting was shaky, with some words crossed out. I felt a lump in my throat as I flipped through the papers. I took the folders to the bedroom I was using and started reading them in order. The earliest date I found was from about 10 years earlier. The reports mentioned that the phenomenon seemed to intensify whenever new people entered the house. There were details about certain rooms having their own atmosphere. One of the notes said, "Third floor corridor extends without logical explanation. Observed 10 extra feet on 2 occasions." That matched my experiences. Another note said, "Walls emit low-frequency sounds that resemble speech." I felt my hands tremble. I dropped the folder on the bed. Then I heard a soft whisper. It sounded close, as if it was right behind me. I spun around, but I saw nothing. I remembered that the note said the voices often called out the occupant's name. My mouth felt dry, and I couldn't swallow for a few seconds. That night, I stayed up until 2 in the morning, reading more of the documents and listening to every noise. Occasionally, the pipes would groan or the wind would push against a window, and I would jerk my head. The tension built in my shoulders, and I felt a constant headache forming at my temples. The house seemed more active. Every creak felt deliberate. I kept glancing at the door, expecting it to open on its own. The notes mentioned the feeling of being watched, especially at night. One report read that the occupant woke up to find the corridor door wide open despite locking it before bed. I locked my bedroom door twice that night. I slid a chair under the doorknob for extra measure. In the morning, I woke up sweating. The air felt hot and heavy in the bedroom, even though it had been chilly before. I opened the window to let in a breeze, but only got a faint gust of air. I decided to get out of the house for a while. I drove into town and stopped at a small diner. I ate breakfast and tried to calm down. I kept thinking someone might be watching me from the windows of the mansion, but that was impossible. Still, the idea wouldn't leave my head. After breakfast, I picked up a few supplies: a handheld thermometer, batteries, and extra flashlights. I planned to gather evidence so I wouldn't feel like I was losing my grip on reality. When I got back to the mansion, it was still afternoon. I walked through each room with the thermometer, writing down the temperature. The living room stayed around 65 degrees Fahrenheit, the kitchen around 68, but the hallway between them was only 6. The bedroom upstairs was at 59, which felt cold and uncomfortable. The attic registered at 78 degrees, which explained why it felt suffocating. I recorded all of this in a notebook. As I walked around, the floorboards groaned, and I kept hearing a faint whisper in the distance. It sounded like my name, drawn out slowly. My chest tightened each time I heard it. I turned corners fast, expecting to see someone, but every corridor looked empty. I kept going until I reached a small study on the second floor. The door was closed, and the handle felt cold under my hand. I pushed it open and shone my flashlight around. The windows were covered by thick curtains. There was a large desk in the center and a heavy wooden chair behind it. The desk drawers were locked. I went to check the built-in bookshelf along the wall. Most books were about architecture, history, or some old reference materials. I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut right in front of me. I jumped back and felt my heart pounding. I lunged for the doorknob and yanked it open. At first, it didn't budge. Then, after a second try, it opened. I stepped into the hallway, breathing hard. I looked around, but no one else was there. Back in my bedroom, I reviewed the reports again. My uncle's notes mentioned intense activity on the second floor study, exactly where I just experienced the door slamming. One of the notes said, "Do not stay in the study alone at night." That made me feel sick to my stomach. I tossed the folder aside and sat on the edge of the bed. My face felt hot, and my heartbeat pounded in my ears. I realized the whispering from the walls was louder now, and it followed me from room to room. I wondered if the mansion wanted me to leave. But there was another possibility in the reports. Sometimes these events seemed like they wanted to trap the occupant, almost like the house needed someone inside. I told myself I would leave the next day if things got worse. But that night I heard the whispering grow more insistent. It came from behind my headboard. It had a breathy quality, as if it was pushing through a small gap in the wall. I grabbed the flashlight and swept it across the room. The light revealed the peeling wallpaper, the dusty floor, and the old dresser. I saw nothing else. Yet the whisper continued. I got up, walked to the wall, and pressed my hand against it. The surface felt icy. I felt my shoulders tense and I had a tightness in my chest. I called out, "What do you want?" My voice echoed off the walls. I didn't get a real answer, just a faint whisper that might have sounded like my name. I felt my stomach churn, and I stepped away. My foot hit one of the floorboards at an odd angle, and it squeaked. I thought about those reports hidden under the floor, and I felt trapped. The next morning, I tried to pack my things. My plan was to throw everything in my car and drive away. But while gathering my belongings, I heard the corridor footsteps. I cracked open the bedroom door and peered out. The hallway seemed to stretch longer than before. I counted the doors. There should have been 3, but I saw 4. My mouth went dry, and I moved slowly toward what looked like an extra door. It led to another room that I hadn't noticed before. I turned the knob. The door opened into a small storage area full of shelves. The air inside was stale and I saw old crates stacked in the corner. I stepped in to look around. Then I heard the door slam shut behind me. I rushed back, but the knob wouldn't turn. I started to panic. I banged on the door. My heart raced, and my breathing grew uneven. I pushed and pulled on the knob for what felt like minutes. Finally, the door opened, and I stumbled into the hallway. My hands were shaking, and I felt dizzy. I grabbed my suitcase and ran downstairs. The corridor seemed normal again, with the usual number of doors. I didn't waste time checking. I threw my suitcase into the trunk of my car and got in the driver's seat. My hands were sweaty on the steering wheel. I turned the key in the ignition, but the engine made a chugging sound and refused to start. I tried again. Still nothing. I sat there pressing my forehead against the steering wheel, trying to stay calm. I waited a few minutes, then tried once more. It started on the third try. I pulled out of the driveway, my heart pounding the entire time. As I glanced at the mansion in the rearview mirror, the windows looked dark, and the spires reached into the sky. I felt like the house was watching me. I thought I was safe once I got onto the main road, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the mansion still had a grip on me. I heard faint whispers in my head and my arms felt cold. I gripped the wheel until my knuckles turned white. I wanted to tell someone what I experienced, but I didn't have any clear proof, only those old files. My plan was to stay in a motel for a couple of nights. I still had the key to the mansion, though I wasn't sure if I would go back. Part of me felt like I couldn't escape it. Even on the road, I swore I could feel the hallway floors groaning under my feet and hear that whisper in the distance. For now I'm out, but whenever I'm alone in a room, I catch myself checking the shadows. I check the walls for strange sounds. I keep thinking about those corridors and the different temperatures. I imagine those documents under the floorboards describing everything that happened. I see them every time I close my eyes. I don't know if the mansion wants to pull me back, or if it's just letting me carry a piece of it wherever I go. All I know is that place is real, and it doesn't let go easily. I can still feel it whenever I think about it for more than a few seconds. It's like my name is still floating in the walls, calling me back. So far, I haven't answered, but the pull is there and I can't pretend it's gone. I told myself I wouldn't return, but I haven't handed over the property to anyone else. The lawyers keep asking what I plan to do with it. I haven't decided. Part of me feels I should sell it, let someone else figure out its secrets. Another part of me worries about unleashing that place on someone else. I don't know if it's safe to abandon it, or if it's best to keep it locked up. For now, it's there, and I'm here, hoping the house stays quiet. But in the back of my mind, I can still hear it. And if I listen closely, I think it's waiting for me. I still remember the moment I realized something was wrong. It was late, around 11 at night. I was standing in my bathroom brushing my teeth like I always do before bed. I leaned forward to spit out the toothpaste and rinse my mouth. When I looked back up, I caught my reflection blinking. It happened half a second after I did. I stood there for a few seconds staring at my own face in the mirror, waiting to see if I had imagined it. My eyes were itchy, and I felt exhausted. My shoulders felt stiff from a day of work, so I told myself I was just tired. It was probably nothing. I turned off the light and went to bed. The next morning, I almost forgot about it. I woke up around 7:00, made a quick breakfast, and tried not to think about how bad the coffee tasted. My stomach felt tense, but I blamed it on my weird sleep the night before. I got dressed and went to the bathroom to shave. My cheeks felt rough, and the skin around my chin was sensitive. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. I looked in the mirror, shaving cream already on my face. I tried to ignore the slight unease in my chest. I glanced at my eyes. They looked a bit red. My reflection seemed normal at first, but I remembered what happened the night before, so I deliberately blinked one eye just to check. My reflection blinked back at the exact same time. I exhaled in relief. Everything seemed aligned. I told myself that I had just been too exhausted to see straight the night before. I went about my day. I drove to work, and the hum of the engine put me in a fog. At every red light, I glanced at the rearview mirror. I caught my own eyes looking back, but nothing was out of the ordinary. When I got to the office, I felt silly about the entire thing. Still, at lunch, I caught myself staring at the window in front of my table. The reflection of my face against the glass was faint, but I kept waiting for it to move on its own. It didn't. I had a sandwich and tried to refocus on normal life. I got home that evening around 6. My apartment was stuffy, so I opened a window. The sun was starting to set, creating a slight glare on the glass. I paused for a second when I saw my reflection. The light was hitting it in a strange way. My reflection's eyes appeared darker than mine, and the shape of my mouth seemed off. My actual mouth was relaxed, but the mouth in the window looked a bit tense, as if it were on the verge of speaking. My skin felt cold. I turned away and headed to the kitchen. I forced myself to ignore that flash of weirdness. I prepared a quick dinner. The utensils clanked against the plate, and the noise seemed louder than usual. When I reached for a knife, I saw a distorted version of my face in the metal. My stomach twisted. The reflection in the knife looked as if it were frowning. My lips were tight in the reflection, but I wasn't frowning with my actual face. My heart gave a quick jolt in my chest. I set the knife down, took a breath, and walked away from the kitchen. I didn't feel hungry after that. My head was pounding, and I felt a heaviness in my arms. I wanted to shake off the fear, but it was creeping in. The air in my apartment felt stale. I turned on the TV in the living room to distract myself. The noise helped a bit. After a while, I convinced myself that I just needed sleep. It was probably stress, or maybe I hadn't been drinking enough water. Still, I felt uneasy. That night I lay in bed, half awake, half asleep. The clock on my nightstand read 2. My eyes burned and my throat felt dry. I heard a dull drip from the bathroom faucet. Drip, drip. The slow rhythm was driving me crazy. So I got up. I walked to the bathroom in the dark. I felt along the wall for the switch. My fingers trembled a bit. When the light flicked on, I froze. My reflection in the bathroom mirror stood staring back at me. But it seemed like the eyes were locked onto me even before the light came on. It was as if it was already looking in my direction, waiting. My heart thumped in my chest. My reflection's face looked calm, but I could feel my own face tensing. My breath was shallow. I shut off the faucet and stared at the mirror for a long moment, waiting for it to do something else. It didn't. I left the bathroom light on when I went back to bed. Over the next few days, I started noticing more and more odd details. When I passed by any reflective surface, I would pause to check. Sometimes I'd see my reflection in the window, and the expression would be slightly off. One time while I was washing dishes, I glanced at the reflection of my face in the soapy water. It looked distorted, but for a second I was sure I saw the reflection grimace. My heart pounded, and I felt a tingling sensation in my arms. I rinsed the dishes fast and tried to catch my breath. Every time it happened, I told myself it was a trick of the light or a product of my anxious mind. But late at night, when the apartment was quiet, I couldn't help but think about it. I'd walk around, double-checking the locks on the doors and windows. My stomach would churn, and my palms would be sweaty. I tried to fall asleep with the TV on so I wouldn't think about what might be happening in the darkness. One night, I woke up to use the bathroom again. The moment I switched on the light, I heard a faint tap on the mirror. It was like a fingernail tapping on glass. I froze in place. My entire body felt stiff. The tap lasted for about 2 seconds, then stopped. I couldn't bring myself to move closer to the mirror. I stood there, my heart racing, breathing fast. My hands felt damp, and there was this shiver running through my shoulders. I slowly backed out of the bathroom and left the light on. I couldn't sleep after that. I sat in my living room, feeling my heart pound against my chest, staring at the TV without paying attention to what was on. The next morning, I noticed something new. It wasn't just in my bathroom mirror anymore. My reflection was appearing in different mirrors or reflective surfaces around my apartment at the same time. I'd walk into the bedroom, and a reflection would be waiting on the shiny part of my closet door. Then I'd walk to the kitchen, and I'd see another one in the oven door. Each one looked a bit different from the others. Some looked angry, some looked curious, some looked like they were studying me. My chest tightened every time I saw a new reflection. I could feel sweat forming on my forehead, and my hands would shake. Sometimes I'd run back into the living room just to get away from them. I tried covering some of the mirrors. I draped a sheet over the big mirror in my hallway that helped a little, but I couldn't get rid of the windows or the glass in the bathroom. And even if I covered everything, there were still things like spoons, knives, phone screens, or anything else that had a shiny surface. Every time I saw my reflection, it was slightly different. I saw one reflection with a small smile that I definitely wasn't making with my actual face. Another time I saw a reflection with wider eyes, like it was alarmed or excited. The sense of being watched got stronger. I started feeling like they were all around me, waiting for me to slip up. I checked the edges of the mirrors for any kind of gaps or illusions. I pressed my fingertips against the glass, feeling the cool surface. I tried to see if the reflection would push back. Of course, it didn't happen when I was looking for it. But later, when I was in bed or sitting on the couch, I'd get this shiver down my spine. It felt like I was being observed from somewhere else in the apartment. I began to wonder if I was losing my mind. I drank more coffee than usual, hoping to stay alert. My eyes felt gritty and my head hurt most of the time. Work became a blur. I would pretend everything was normal during the day, then come home to this silent, oppressive tension in my apartment. One evening, I heard what sounded like a faint whisper coming from the bathroom. I turned on every light in the place, grabbed a flashlight from my kitchen drawer and headed to the bathroom. I found nothing except my own reflection, but it looked as though the face in the mirror was about to speak. My stomach churned and I felt short of breath. I slammed the bathroom door shut and put a chair against it as if that would stop anything from coming out. I didn't know what else to do. By the time the next week started, I wasn't sleeping well at all. My eyes had dark circles and my hands shook whenever I tried to do normal tasks like typing on my computer or making a sandwich. The reflections seemed more active in the evenings. I would walk into the kitchen and catch one of them staring at me in the toaster. The face would look intense, as if it were analyzing me. Then I'd leave the kitchen and walk to the living room, and I'd see another reflection in the TV screen, almost pressing up against the surface like it was trying to get closer. Every time, my chest felt tighter, my breathing grew shallow, and my mind raced. The absolute worst moment so far happened a few nights ago. I was sitting on my couch, trying to watch some late-night talk show. I kept the volume high. I was trying to ignore all the reflective surfaces. Suddenly, my living room window rattled. I jumped to my feet, my heart pounding. I stared at the window, expecting to see a branch or maybe the wind pushing against it. But the glass was perfectly still after that single rattle. Then I saw my own reflection. This one had a strange grin, just a slight curve of the lips. Its eyes were wide and fixed on me. I felt sweat roll down the back of my neck. I looked at my actual face in the reflection to see if I was somehow grinning, but my mouth was just parted in shock. The reflection's grin stayed for a few seconds, then vanished, like it relaxed into a neutral expression. My entire body felt cold. My legs felt shaky. I couldn't bring myself to step closer to the window. It was like I half expected a hand to reach out and pull me into the glass. I ran into my bedroom and shut the door. I stood there, my heart pounding, pressing my forehead against the wall. My chest felt tight and my breathing was quick. I felt pinned down by fear. That reflection looked separate from me, like it had its own thoughts. Now, every time I pass a mirror or any surface that shows my face, I wonder which version of me is looking back. I see glimpses of different expressions, each with a subtle difference in the eyes or the way the lips form. I feel like these reflections are circling me, studying me, waiting for a chance to do something. I worry that one might step out of the mirror and replace me. The thought makes my stomach ache. My arms tense up whenever I consider it. I double-check every mirror, looking for signs of movement that doesn't match mine. I've tried removing anything reflective from the apartment, but I can't remove everything. Spoons, faucets, window glass, phone screens. All of these keep giving me glimpses of those other versions of me. I feel like I'm trapped in my own home, and I don't know how to fight against a reflection. I've tried cleaning the mirrors, hoping the act of wiping them down would make them normal again. I've also tried leaving the lights on all night so I can see anything clearly in the dark. Nothing stops it. There are always more surfaces, more angles, more moments when I turn the corner and catch a different face staring back at me. Sometimes I stand in front of the bathroom mirror and just watch, waiting for the reflection to do something. My shoulders feel stiff and my mouth goes dry. After a minute or two, my reflection seems normal again. Then, out of nowhere, you'll see a slight delay in the blink. My heart will jump. My stomach will clench. Sometimes I hear a faint squeak of the floor behind me, but when I turn to look, nothing is there. Then I whip my head back to the mirror, and the reflection is just standing there, matching me again. I can't sleep at night. I keep thinking that one of these reflections might find a way out. I don't know how that could happen, but the idea gets stuck in my head. My pulse races when I think about the possibility. I imagine waking up in the middle of the night and seeing another version of myself standing at the foot of the bed. My jaw tightens every time that thought crosses my mind. I wish I could stop this, but I don't know how. I don't even know if it's real or if I'm going crazy from exhaustion. Still, I can't ignore what I see. Each reflection has a different expression, and they all seem determined in some way. Sometimes it feels like they're communicating with each other, coordinating through the glass surfaces while I'm left on this side, frantic and unsure. I can't call anyone for help because I can't explain this without sounding insane. And I'm too scared to let anyone come over and see me like this. For now, I just keep my distance from mirrors whenever possible. I take the fastest showers I can. I cover most of the windows after sunset. I sleep with a small lamp on in the bedroom, even though the soft glow sometimes creates faint reflections on the polished floor. I try not to look at them. I lie in bed, hearing my heartbeat in my ears. Sometimes I hear tapping or light scratches on mirrors down the hall. I stay frozen in place, hoping it will stop. Eventually it does. But then I'm left with a pounding headache and a sense of dread. That's where things stand right now. Being constantly on edge, with sweat on my brow, and a tightness in my chest. Every day I wonder if this will be the day when one of those reflections crosses the line and replaces me. The thought makes me tremble. I can't decide which is worse. The possibility that these reflections are real or the possibility that I'm imagining it all. Either way, I'm trapped. I can't escape my own face. It's everywhere I look in every glossy surface, blinking slightly too late or smiling when I'm not. And each time I see it, my heart hammers with fear that maybe one of them will finally step through the glass and take my place. I'll never forget the moment I saw those old portraits for sale at the auction. They were stacked in a corner, the frames covered in dust, the paint chipped around the edges. Something about them made me pause. The auction room was loud, and people rushed around looking for antiques or bargains. But my attention stayed on that pile of portraits. I felt an odd pull. I didn't ask anyone for advice, and I didn't think about it too long. I just bid on them without hesitation. I wanted them for my living room. I wanted something that would give a different feel to my home, something authentic. The price wasn't high, so I made the purchase. I didn't realize how much my life would change because of those paintings. The first day I set them up in my living room, I noticed little details. There were about 10 portraits, each showing a different person in old-fashioned clothes. Some had stern faces, and others looked neutral. The backgrounds were dark. The frames looked handmade. I wiped off the dust and hung them in a neat line on the largest wall. I thought they looked interesting, so I didn't question why they had been left in that corner at the auction. I just assumed they were old family portraits from some estate sale. The living room felt different with them. I liked that at first. It was a new atmosphere. I had friends come over that first week and they said the paintings gave the room an old-time vibe. About a week later, I was sitting in the living room with the lights dimmed, sipping coffee. I glanced at one of the portraits. I remember the subject was an older man with a trimmed beard and very sharp eyes. The day I bought it, his expression had seemed almost blank. But that night it looked serious, almost angry. His eyebrows were tilted inward like he was irritated about something. I thought it was just my imagination. Maybe the lighting made it appear that way. I shrugged it off and went to bed. I didn't give it much thought. The next morning, I walked into the living room to open the curtains. I couldn't shake the feeling that the painting seemed different again. The older man's beard looked slightly longer, and his face had more wrinkles. Another portrait, a woman with her hair pinned up, now seemed to have more lines around her eyes. I stood there for a while trying to figure out if it was the result of dust or a trick of the light. My stomach felt uneasy. I closed the curtains partway and decided I'd check them again later. I told myself it was nothing, but it kept happening. Every time I sat down in that room, I had this creeping sensation that the figures were aging. Their faces grew more lined, their eyes more sunken. It was subtle at first, but then it became obvious. I started seeing clear differences in the shape of their mouths, the drooping of their eyelids, and the way they seemed to glare back at me. I avoided looking at them directly for a few days, but I could still sense them in my peripheral vision. It felt like they were watching me. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I'd stare at the portraits for too long and my heart would pound in my ears. I kept wondering if I should take them down and toss them, but something stopped me. I felt compelled to keep them on the wall. I don't know why. After about 2 weeks, I noticed a definite change in the eyes of each portrait. There was a shine in them, a strange brightness. When the lights in the room were dim, their eyes seemed to reflect any bit of light, almost like animals in the dark. That made me anxious. My hands would shake if I stood too close, and I would step back to keep some distance. Yet, I still didn't remove them from the wall. Instead, I convinced myself that I just needed to understand what was going on. I started taking photos on my phone every day, trying to compare them. In the photos, the differences were clear. New wrinkles, new lines, sharper expressions. I had proof that these portraits weren't staying the same. I felt a knot in my stomach every time I flipped through the pictures. One night, I decided to check the back of one of the frames. I wanted to see if there was any date or artist name that might explain why these paintings looked so strange. I pulled down the portrait of a woman with a tight bun in her hair. She was the one whose eyes seemed to follow me everywhere I went in the room. The frame felt rough and splintered at the edges. When I turned it over, I saw a small tear in the paper backing. I lifted the torn piece carefully and found a single sheet of paper tucked inside, folded several times. My hands shook more when I realized there was some sort of code or cipher on it. It was a piece of text full of strange symbols and words I didn't understand. It mentioned entrapment and souls, and there was a single phrase in normal script that said something about binding a person's essence to a painted image. I felt nauseous reading it. I tried to calm down. I put the painting back on the wall and placed the note on my kitchen table. My mind raced with possibilities. Was this some joke? Was it a hoax or some occult nonsense? I wanted answers, but I didn't know where to start. I began searching online for references to curses and souls trapped in portraits. I came across old stories about painters who believed they could capture a person's spirit in a painting, but everything seemed vague. I didn't find anything about the exact symbols in the note. Over the next few days, I kept investigating. I looked at each painting and checked behind the frames. 3 more paintings had similar notes, different patterns, but the same references to souls, curses, and something about the risk of turning into a portrait if you spent too much time around them. My palms got clammy every time I read the lines. My breath would catch in my throat. I started sleeping with all the lights on, but I still jumped at every sound in the night. Sometimes late in the evening I'd sit on my couch, staring at those faces. The people in the portraits looked older than before. Some had hair thinning out, while others had deep lines around their mouths like they'd been frowning for years. Their eyes had that odd glow. It felt like I was being judged. I imagined them seeing every move I made and every expression on my face. I heard the floor creak once or twice when I was completely still, and I almost convinced myself it was one of them stepping out of the frame. I know that sounds crazy, but I could feel my body tensing up, ready to run. At one point, I tried to talk myself down. Maybe it was just paint reacting to changes in humidity or temperature. Maybe I was overreacting because I read those notes, but I couldn't ignore the evidence. The photos on my phone showed that each portrait was changing in ways that didn't make any sense, and my own gut told me I wasn't imagining it. Something was very wrong. My anxiety grew so much that I started avoiding my living room entirely. I'd make excuses to stay in my bedroom or go out for a walk. I'd come home late from work to reduce the amount of time spent in that room, but the few minutes I did spend there felt suffocating. I'd feel a tightness in my chest. My stomach churned, my heart rate sped up, and I would try not to look at the wall. But no matter where I stood, I could sense their eyes on me. One evening, I got home from work and found the living room lights flickering. There was no storm, and the rest of the house lights were fine. Only the lamps in the living room flickered. The portraits seemed to look even more intense. The older man with the beard had an angry scowl, and I swear I saw new streaks of gray in his hair. Another painting, a woman in a lace collar, had deeper shadows under her eyes. I felt a chill on my arms, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I turned on every lamp in the house, but that didn't make me feel any safer. I picked up the notes again, trying to figure out if there was any mention of reversing the curse or destroying it. The text was mostly cryptic. I saw references to a ritual involving a mirror, a candle, and blood, but I didn't want to do anything that extreme. I didn't know if it would make things worse. Still, I thought about it. I paced around my kitchen holding the papers, my mind spinning with worry. I felt lightheaded and had to sit down. As I studied the text more, I realized it said something about the observer becoming the observed. There was a line that implied anyone who owned the portraits could end up trapped if they spent too long in their presence. It said the paintings would feed off the owner's energy. My throat went dry. I felt my pulse hammering in my neck. I couldn't stand the idea of turning into a painting. I pictured myself stuck inside a frame, aging in front of someone else. My stomach twisted. I couldn't let that happen. I decided to remove the paintings from the wall. I grabbed a large box from the garage and set it down next to my couch. I took down the first portrait, the older man with the beard. As soon as I lifted it, I felt a strange pressure in my chest. My arms felt heavy. I started to sweat. I carried it to the box, careful not to look at his face. I was worried I might see him move in my peripheral vision. Then I went back for the others one by one, pulling them off the wall. Each time I did, I felt that strange heaviness. I put them all in the box and closed the lid. I felt a small sense of relief, but it wasn't enough. I set the box in a corner of my garage and covered it with an old blanket. I locked the garage door behind me. My nerves were still raw, but I felt better not seeing those eyes every time I walked into the living room. That night I slept a little easier, though I still woke up twice in a sweat imagining the paintings were in my bedroom. But the next morning my pulse sped up when I noticed faint footprints on the garage floor. They were small, more like smears than clear shoe prints, but they led from the box toward the door. The door was still locked and I found no one outside. I had no explanation for it. I rubbed my forehead, trying to calm down, telling myself it might have been my own footprints from the previous night. But I wasn't sure. For the next week, I kept the paintings in the garage, and the living room felt empty. I actually preferred it that way. I had trouble relaxing though because I still felt uneasy. I kept glancing at the garage door, half expecting to see someone or something standing there. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, flicking on the overhead light. The blanket was still over the box. I heard a soft creaking sound, like wood rubbing against wood. My eyes darted around, but I saw nothing move. I lifted the blanket and opened the box just to check. The portraits were all there, stacked in the same order I'd placed them, but each face was more aged. The man with the beard had deep hollows under his eyes. His expression was pure anger. The woman with the bun looked furious. Her eyes nearly glowed under the garage light. My heart pounded so hard that I actually gasped for air. I slammed the box shut and stumbled back. I locked the garage door again, determined not to open it anymore. Now I'm stuck. I want to get rid of them. But I also worry about passing this problem on to somebody else. The notes mention that if you destroy the paintings the wrong way, you could trigger a worse consequence. I don't know if that's true or not, but I don't want to risk it. So here I am, living in constant tension. The living room is empty, and I avoid the garage as much as I can. I've thought about looking for someone who understands these curses, maybe an expert in weird artifacts, but I'm afraid of what they'll say or what I might have to do. There's a lingering fear that this curse has already marked me. I still have that slight urge to open the box. A part of me wants to keep watching the changes, like I'm drawn to them. I can't explain it. My hands shake when I imagine peeling back the blanket and seeing how much older they look today. My heart races when I recall the text about souls being trapped in portraits, and I wonder if each day that I wait, I'm getting closer to joining them. Sometimes my reflection in the mirror looks a bit tired, and I have new lines around my eyes that I don't remember having before. That's where things stand. The paintings are locked in my garage, hidden from view but not from my thoughts. I feel a constant weight on my chest whenever I think about them. I don't have a final solution. I just have a deep, gnawing worry that every hour spent near them or even owning them might pull me closer to whatever curse is bound to those portraits. I'm telling you this because I don't know what else to do. I have these cryptic notes on my kitchen table, in a box of cursed portraits in my garage, and I'm stuck in this limbo of fear. Part of me hopes it's all in my head, but the other part believes I'm looking at something real and dangerous. If I don't find a way to break this curse, I'm afraid I'll eventually see my own face in one of those frames, staring back at me with the same glow in my eyes, and that thought makes it hard to breathe. I don't know what my next step is, but I know I can't ignore this forever. I saw the cabin when I was about 2 hours into my hike. The trees were tangled in a way that made it hard to see more than a few feet ahead, and the air felt damp against my skin. I wasn't looking for any abandoned structure. I just wanted some fresh air and a break from my usual routine. But something about that rundown roof, poking out from behind the branches, caught my eye. The roof had holes in it, and I noticed fallen leaves piled on top of rotted shingles. I stopped, stood there, and took a moment to figure out if it was safe to get closer. My gut tightened. The cabin looked like it didn't belong in that spot. Yet I couldn't ignore it. I pushed a few low-hanging limbs aside and approached. The walls were made of old logs that smelled like wet moss. I saw strips of peeling paint, but I couldn't figure out what color it used to be. The front door leaned to one side, probably because the hinges were rusted. There was no lock. I felt an itch in my throat. Part of me wanted to leave it alone and move on with the hike, but curiosity took over. I tested the door and it creaked open without a fight. Inside, the light was weak. The place smelled of earth and stale air. I squinted to see if there were any animals or signs of recent activity. Cobwebs stretched across the corners in a thin layer of dust that covered most surfaces. A broken chair sat near a small table. I took a few careful steps, testing each floorboard as I went. They groaned but held my weight. I swept my flashlight beam around and saw shelves against the wall with random items. A rusty lantern, a few empty cans, and a thick leather-bound book. The book looked older than anything else in there. It had a layer of dust that made my nose itch. I slid it off the shelf and blew on it. Dust scattered in the air, making me cough. I flicked through the pages. The handwriting was a little shaky, like someone wrote it in a hurry. Some words were smudged. It mentioned a lot about lights at night. It talked about whispers that came from behind the trees. There was a whole page on how these lights floated around after midnight, sometimes in groups. The writer said they heard voices that didn't sound human. The more I read, the colder I felt. It was as if the temperature in the cabin dropped a few degrees. The last entry said something about feeling watched, but the pages were incomplete at the end, as if the writer never finished. I thought about leaving right then. My nerves were on edge, but I also felt a pull, like I needed to see if the diary was telling the truth, or if the person who wrote it just imagined things. After a few minutes, I decided I'd spend one night in that cabin. If nothing happened, I'd call it a weird experience and go home. I gathered some dry wood from outside, found an old fireplace, and managed to start a small fire. The smoke went up through a cracked chimney pipe. It wasn't cozy, but it provided enough heat to keep me from shivering. I unrolled my sleeping bag near the fireplace. By then it was late afternoon, so I had some time before sundown. I checked my phone, but there was no signal. I had a small stash of snacks and some water. I set them on the table and tried to make myself comfortable. As darkness fell, I noticed how quiet the place became. There were no typical forest sounds like crickets or nocturnal animals calling out. The silence pressed down on me. My ears felt strained from trying to pick up any little noise. I looked out the window and saw a stretch of trees in front of the cabin. The moonlight filtered through, but it wasn't bright. Shadows covered most of the ground. I sat on the floor near the fire reading more of the diary. It had repeated mentions of a certain time, midnight. The writer claimed that's when the lights became most active. The wind outside started to pick up, rustling the branches. Around 11, I heard a dull thud against the cabin wall, like something hitting the wood. I jumped to my feet and aimed my flashlight at the spot. I didn't see any hole or mark. Maybe a branch hit the side. My heart was pounding. I tried to calm down, telling myself it was probably just the wind. A little before midnight, I felt a chill drift through the cabin, even though the fire was still going. My breath felt colder in my chest. I looked toward the window and saw the branches swaying. But I also thought I saw a slight movement of light in the distance. It was faint, almost like a glow. I couldn't tell if it was just the moonlight hitting something reflective. I decided to stay put and watch. My stomach felt tight. My palms were sweaty. I wiped them on my jeans. At midnight, a sudden gust of wind whipped around the cabin. The fire flickered, nearly going out. The door rattled, and the windows shook a bit. Then I heard voices. It was more like a chorus of soft moans, stretched out into something that sounded like a strange language. I strained my ears but couldn't make out any words. The voices were rhythmic, like a distant chanting. I stood up slowly, my knees tense. I grabbed my flashlight and walked to the window. I pressed my face close to the glass, trying to see if there were people out there. But I saw only darkness and a few swaying branches. The whispering continued, then faded for a moment, and then returned from another direction, circling the cabin. I turned off my flashlight for a few seconds, hoping my eyes would adjust and give me a better view outside. My heart thumped so hard I could hear blood rushing in my ears. A tingle ran down my spine. Every hair on my arm stood up. My mind raced. I thought about heading out, grabbing my things, and leaving, but I also couldn't shake my curiosity. I wanted to see if the lights would appear the way the diary described. Then I caught a glimpse of a flickering glow through the gaps in the trees. It was to my left. I moved to that side of the cabin, stepping carefully on the creaky floor. The chanting grew louder. If it were words, they had no meaning for me. They sounded rough, not like any language I recognized. I propped myself against the wall and peeked through a small crack in the wooden boards. I saw something faint, several small orbs of light floating in a slow pattern among the trees. They weren't bright enough to illuminate the entire area, but they stood out against the darkness. I counted at least 4 or 5 of them. They drifted left, then right, as if circling. My stomach churned. Sweat trickled down my temples. I couldn't look away. The chanting stopped, replaced by a heavy silence. I was breathing through my mouth because my nose was clogged with the heavy smell of old wood and ashes from the fireplace. My thoughts raced with possibilities. I wondered if someone was playing a prank, but the diary said this had happened before. Also, there was no obvious source for lights like that. They seemed to move too freely, almost floating without any beams or wires. I stepped back and stared at the fire. The flames were low now, mostly orange embers. I considered stoking it, but I was too focused on the sounds and lights outside. Suddenly, the chanting started again, this time coming from the right side of the cabin. I ran to that window. It was the same glow now on that side. The lights floated closer, then pulled back as if testing something. The wind outside had died down, so the cabin was still, except for those voices that rose and fell. I felt my chest tighten. My breathing grew shallow. I clutched the edge of the windowsill. I wanted a better view, but there wasn't enough moonlight. I glanced at the cabin door. It looked fragile, like something could kick it open without much effort. I felt a surge of anxiety because I realized I had nothing to barricade it with. I had a small knife in my backpack, but that wasn't going to help against something I couldn't even see clearly. The voices moved closer. They sounded like they were right outside the front door. My palms were sweating again, and a throb settled behind my eyes. I backed away from the window and grabbed the diary off the table. I felt like I needed to hold on to something that connected me to whoever wrote those entries. The chanting filled the air, and then as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. Silence rushed in, and my ears rang from the absence of sound. I stood there for a full minute, unable to move. Then I heard it, a gentle scraping sound against the wall near the fireplace. It was light at first, like fabric brushing wood, but then it dragged slowly, like someone's hand moving across the logs. My heart hammered. I shone my flashlight at the fireplace, but saw nothing. The scraping continued for a few more seconds, then stopped. I realized I was trembling. My legs felt weak. I started to think about how to get out of the cabin without getting caught up in whatever was outside. But the lights were still there, drifting among the trees. I didn't want to step outside and walk straight into them. I paced in a small circle, swallowing repeatedly because my throat felt bone dry. The air inside the cabin seemed stale and heavier than before. Then I felt a presence. It was like standing close to someone, but there was no one in my line of sight. The sensation weighed on me, making the space around me feel crowded. I felt my skin prickle. I shone the flashlight around, looking for any shape or shadow. I saw nothing unusual, just the old furniture and dust motes in the beam of light. But the feeling didn't go away. My neck tingled. My shoulders tensed up. I took a couple of steps backward and accidentally knocked over the broken chair. It crashed to the floor, echoing in the silence. Right after that crash, a whisper rose near my ear. It wasn't a word I recognized. It was a single hiss of breath, like something trying to speak close to my face. The heat drained from my body. My lungs tightened. I spun around, brandishing my flashlight. The air behind me was empty, but I sensed movement, as if something were retreating. I stumbled back toward the fireplace. My chest was heaving. I felt trapped. I kept hearing the faint echoes of that whisper in my head. Time felt distorted. I looked at my watch, but it was hard to focus. It was around 12:30 or so, but I might have misread. The chanting started up again, more distant this time. The lights outside seemed to spread out. I checked the front window and saw them moving deeper into the woods. The chanting followed them. I heard the faint hum of those unknown words drifting away. For a moment, I considered making a dash for it, but I didn't trust my legs to hold me. I felt exhausted from the surge of adrenaline. I slumped against the wall and forced myself to breathe in and out slowly. My pulse pounded in my ears. The cabin was quiet again, except for the crackle of dying embers in the fireplace. The presence I felt before was still there, but weaker. I tried to focus on logical steps. I told myself to wait until the lights went far enough away, then gather my gear and leave before sunrise. I waited for about 15 minutes, though it felt longer. The chanting faded until I couldn't hear it at all. The wind outside remained calm. I didn't see the lights anymore. My body still felt tense, but I decided I couldn't stay in that cabin another minute. I stuffed the diary into my backpack, rolled up my sleeping bag, and stepped quietly to the door. I opened it an inch and peered out. The trees looked normal again, just silhouettes in the night. No floating orbs, no strange voices. I slipped out, making sure the door didn't slam shut behind me. The ground outside was soft and damp. My boots sank into the layer of decaying leaves. My flashlight revealed a narrow path. I walked as quickly as I could without making too much noise. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see orbs following me or to hear those voices again. The forest felt eerily silent, but at least I wasn't hearing chanting. I pressed on, my heart pounding from fear and the strain of hiking in near darkness. After a while, the path opened up a bit. I felt a slight breeze against my face. I took that as a good sign. I kept moving until the sky started to lighten. My legs ached, and my shoulders felt sore from clenching them. But I didn't stop. I just wanted distance between me and that cabin. When the sun finally came up, I found a small clearing. I rested there, dropping my pack to the ground. I wiped sweat off my forehead. My mind kept replaying the chanting, those floating lights, and the feeling that someone was right behind me. I had no proof except for the diary in my bag, but I knew what I experienced was real enough to rattle me. I never heard anything else like that for the rest of my time in the forest. Eventually, I made it back to my car and drove away. I still have that diary. Sometimes I'll open it and read a passage or two, then quickly shove it back on a shelf because it brings back the tension in my chest. I haven't shared much about this with other people. I don't need anyone calling me delusional or insisting I go back there. I know what I heard and I know what I saw, and that's enough for me. I don't care if there's an explanation. I'm not going back to find out. I still remember the moment I tore away that first chunk of rotten wood in my basement. It felt like ripping open the skin of the house, exposing something I was never meant to see. There was a door behind the debris and it looked sealed from the inside. I'd never noticed that outline before, and I'd been down in that basement 1,000 times. The discovery felt wrong, like I'd stepped over a line I shouldn't have crossed. I couldn't just ignore it though. I'd already started a renovation project in the house, and this door demanded attention. That was how it all began, and it's still unfolding in ways I can fully explain. I'm a regular guy. I'm not a believer in the supernatural, and I've always liked to fix things myself. This house is old, and the basement has always been damp and cramped. But I never felt uneasy down there until I found that door. It was hidden behind layers of plywood and cement. Initially, I thought maybe there was an old storage room that had been closed off. The shape of the door was faint under the wood. I noticed the edges because there was a slight gap near the bottom. When I pressed my hand against the area, it flexed a bit, almost as if there was hollow space behind it. The basement floor looked normal, so I assumed it was just an unused compartment. On the first day, I used a crowbar to yank at the boards. They were nailed in deeper than I expected. I had to hammer the crowbar hard to loosen them. My arms were shaking from the effort and I was cursing under my breath. When the first board popped free, a dusty odor came out. My eyes watered from it. The stench reminded me of stale air trapped for too long. I coughed and waved my hand in front of my nose, but I kept going because I wanted to see what was behind all this. When I finally got all the wood off, I saw a thick layer of old cement cracked in places with a faint outline of a door shape. The handle looked battered, like it had been hammered from the other side. My flashlight showed chipped paint and rust. The cement felt cold to the touch. I tried to chip away at it with a chisel and hammer, but it was difficult. Pieces flaked off in small chunks, and dust filled the air. I thought this might be a big project, but I was determined to open it. At first, I didn't notice any odd sounds. I was busy hitting the chisel, listening to the echo of metal against concrete. But that night, I stayed up until around midnight, scanning through online forums about old house renovations. Then I heard something from the basement. It was a low, almost rhythmic noise, which reminded me of someone breathing in short bursts. I froze at my desk, holding my breath, to see if it was just the house settling, but the noise continued. It sounded wet and labored. My stomach tightened and I felt a pulse of tension in my chest. I thought maybe an animal was trapped down there, like a raccoon or something. I decided to check it out in the morning. The next day, I went downstairs with a heavier hammer and a bigger chisel, planning to break more of the cement. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting it to move on its own. That breathing sound from the night before was stuck in my mind. I felt stupid for feeling scared, but I did. My hands trembled a bit when I slid the chisel into the crack. I hammered at the cement until my arms were sore and the basement filled with dust. When I took a step back to see my progress, I realized the door was more visible now. The edges were almost free of cement, showing dark wood or metal. Honestly, it was hard to tell what it was made of under the grime, but it was definitely a door sealed from the inside. No hinges on my side. No lock I could see. It was as if whoever built it wanted to keep something inside or keep something out. As I wiped the sweat from my forehead, I noticed a low vibration under my feet. It was subtle, but it felt like a trembling in the foundation. I paused and held my breath, listening. The air felt thick, and my heart rate picked up. I told myself it was just the furnace kicking on, or maybe a truck passing by outside. But the next night around the same time as before, I heard those same breaths. They sounded louder. It was as if something was leaning right against the door, gasping for air. My body stiffened. I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing that door in the basement, the chiseled edges, and the cold cement. I was determined not to be spooked by weird sounds, so I tried to break down the remaining cement a couple of nights later. That's when strange things started happening to my tools. The first incident occurred when I set my chisel down on a small table in the basement. I left to get a drink of water upstairs. When I came back, the chisel was gone. I checked everywhere, even though there weren't many places for it to roll or fall. The basement floor was clear, and I hadn't put the chisel back in my toolbox. It just vanished. I told myself I must have misplaced it, so I used a different chisel. Later, I found the missing chisel in a corner on the other side of the basement. I had no memory of putting it there. I tried to ignore that, but the following evening while I was hammering at a stubborn chunk of cement, the hammer's metal head snapped clean off the handle. I almost hit my knee. I heard the clank of metal on the floor and nearly lost my balance. I checked the hammer. It didn't look warm enough to break anything. I muttered a series of curses, but grabbed another tool and kept going. Every blow felt heavier than usual. The basement seemed to hum, like there was an energy resonating from inside that door. My palms were sweaty, and I felt short of breath. Then a real shock came. I slammed my crowbar against the last big piece of cement, and the entire house shook. It wasn't a standard vibration. The walls in the basement rattled, and I saw dust float down from the ceiling. I dropped the crowbar. My ears rang. It felt like I'd hit a live wire, or some source of power. I stumbled back, trying to regain my balance. The air seemed to press down on me, making my chest feel tight. It was dead silent except for my own fast breathing. That night, I lay in bed and felt tremors under the floor every few minutes. My heart pounded with each tiny shake. I didn't sleep well. My mind raced with thoughts of what could be behind that door. I told myself it might be some kind of old drainage system or hidden piping, but the rhythmic breath-like sounds didn't fit any explanation. Sometimes I wanted to call someone, maybe a contractor or a friend, but I felt embarrassed. I didn't want to sound unhinged. Plus, I was worried about letting anyone else into that space. It was my house, and I felt weirdly responsible for what was happening. The next morning, I decided to take a more aggressive approach. I brought down a bigger sledgehammer. I wanted to break off the rest of the cement and pry that door open. I put on a dust mask and started swinging. Each blow echoed louder than before. My arms grew sore, and I had to stop to catch my breath. After about 15 minutes, enough of the cement broke away to reveal almost the entire surface of the door. It had deep scratches across it as though someone or something had tried to claw its way out. That discovery made my stomach churn. I ran my hand across the marks. They were uneven and dug into the material. It freaked me out, but I wouldn't back down. I set my stance, swung the sledgehammer, and aimed at the center. The moment I struck the door, an intense vibration coursed through the basement. It felt like an earthquake centered in my foundation. Shelves rattled and tools fell to the floor. I lost my grip on the sledgehammer, and it slid away from me. My legs wobbled. Then I heard a deep groan from behind the door. It sounded like a huge lung filling and deflating. My stomach dropped. I scrambled to pick up my sledgehammer, but it was burning hot, and I couldn't hold it. I had no idea why it got so hot in a matter of seconds. I tried to grab it again using an old rag, but by that time the door started to pulse like a heart beating. I backed away, sweat dripping down my face.
My mind was racing with a million questions, but
I kept moving step by step until I reached the stairs. My heart pounded and my hand shook. When I reached the top, I slammed the basement door and locked it, even though it was just my own house. I sat down on the floor, trying to slow my breathing. My shirt was soaked, and my ears still rang from the vibrations. I felt like something was punishing me for hitting that door. It was guarding itself. Hours later, I forced myself to go back down. I needed to see if the door was still pulsing. I opened the basement door carefully. The light was still on. I walked down the steps, my knees shaky. The basement was quiet except for a low hum that seemed to come from the walls. I approached the door slowly. It was still closed, no sign of cracks or openings. I noticed my sledgehammer near the wall where I dropped it. I used my boot to push it, and it wasn't hot anymore. So, I picked it up and examined it. The head looked warped, like it had heated up and softened in places. I gripped it tight, but I didn't dare swing it again that night. I decided to wait a couple of days before trying anything else. But the nights were horrible. I heard the breathing sounds again, more urgent, like angry panting. The basement door upstairs rattled sometimes in the middle of the night. Each rattle made my skin break out in goosebumps. My chest got tight and I would jump out of bed, rush over and stand there listening. Sometimes everything would go quiet. Other times I heard muffled thumps as if something was pushing on the inside of that hidden door. I could feel an icy tension in the pit of my stomach. I just wanted to make it stop, but I was too scared to go back down on my own at 3 a.m. After those 2 days, I resolved to do one more attempt. I bought a metal cutting saw and a fresh set of power tools. I was going to slice through that door if it killed me. Late in the afternoon, I set up a lamp in front of it to get a clear view. I touched the surface of the door with my fingertips, and it felt like it was gently vibrating under the wood or metal. I pressed harder and heard a faint hollow thump from the other side. My pulse raced, but I steadied myself and began to cut. Sparks flew as the blade met the door, and the noise was deafening. I gritted my teeth, pressing forward. Almost immediately, the basement floor shook. I felt it through my boots. My saw started to jam, and the blade snapped, flying across the room. I jumped back, almost dropping the saw. A deep rumble echoed behind the door, and I felt something shift inside the wall. I smelled something foul seeping through a crack near the frame, like rancid meat. I staggered back, swallowing down the urge to puke. I realized my entire body was shaking, and my throat felt dry. I went up the stairs with my heart pounding. Then for a few seconds I thought about selling the house or just abandoning it. But that's ridiculous. It's my place. I still felt a strange obligation to deal with this myself, no matter how terrifying it was. I wasn't going to let a sealed door run me out of my own home. That night, the vibrations got worse. The walls in the basement made creaking sounds like they were straining against some kind of pressure. I worried that the foundation might crack. As I walked around the first floor, I could feel the pulses in my feet. Sometimes pictures on the wall would shake and small objects on shelves would rattle. My breathing got shallow, and my mouth felt dry. I paced around the living room, jumping at every little noise. I switched on every light. The basement door rattled in its frame, and I just stared at it. My hands were sweaty, and my heart pounded so hard that I thought I might pass out. I realized I needed a break from the house, so I took a drive around the neighborhood. It was dark, and not many people were outside. The cold night air cleared my head a bit, but when I got back, I felt a jolt of dread as soon as I stepped onto the porch. Inside the house was silent, which was almost worse than the rattling. I turned on the kitchen light and then walked down to the basement door. It was quiet, with no sounds or vibrations. I opened it a crack and peeked down the steps. The light was still on in the basement. I stared at that door at the far end. It was closed, and everything looked still. I walked down, my heart thumping like a drum. I placed a hand on the sealed door. It felt cold now. There were no vibrations, no sound. My mouth went dry and I felt an odd relief mixed with a new tension, like a calm before a storm. I pressed my ear against it and held my breath. Nothing. Not a single sound. I'm not sure which is worse, hearing it or not hearing it. But that's where I am now. The door hasn't moved, and I haven't tried to break it again. I'm stuck in a standoff with whatever is behind there. It's quiet tonight, but I still feel the weight of that presence. My tools are scattered across the floor. Some broken, some mysteriously moved. Every time I look at that door, my stomach churns and my fingers twitch with nerves. I can't stop thinking about what might happen if I manage to get it open. Part of me doesn't want to find out. Another part of me can't walk away without knowing. Right now, I'm just standing at the top of the basement stairs, telling you how this all happened. My hands are shaking. The hair on the back of my neck feels stiff. My thoughts jump from solution to solution, but they all end the same way. That door is locked from the inside and something doesn't want me to open it. Every time I try, the house reacts, the door reacts. There are no more illusions for me about normal explanations. Something is there, and it's trying to keep itself hidden. Yet I can't ignore it. That sealed space is the source of every strange vibration, every breath-like noise, every unexpected movement of my tools. I don't know how this will end. The basement still feels like it's alive with that same energy. Even though it's not shaking at this exact moment, my gut tells me that whatever's behind that door is waiting for my next move. I feel trapped in my own home trying to decide if I should keep living with this secret, or do something reckless to tear it open once and for all. But for tonight, I'm just going to close the basement door and keep my distance. I've done enough damage for one day. Tomorrow, maybe you'll be ready to try again. Or maybe I'll board it up and pretend it never existed. Either way, I doubt it'll stay quiet for long. And that's the part that scares me the most. I got that clock from my grandfather's house after he passed away. People said he loved the thing when it worked, but it had been silent for decades. It was a big wooden wall clock with a glass door in front. The gears inside looked rusted in some spots. I never cared much for old stuff, but I took it because it was part of the inheritance. I brought it home and leaned it against the wall in my living room, not expecting anything more than a chunk of wood collecting dust. A week later, I decided to hang it. I cleared a spot in my living room and mounted it at about eye level. I tried winding it, but the hands didn't move. The pendulum stayed still, no matter how many times I nudged it. I shrugged it off and stepped away. For a few days, it just sat there silent and useless. Then, on the fourth day, I walked into the living room and heard a steady ticking. I froze. The pendulum was swinging. The second hand kept moving in circles, but something was off. The hour hand and minute hand pointed to weird numbers that I couldn't fully understand. It almost looked like the clock read 36.6, which made no sense. I stared at it for a few seconds. Then the second hand clicked into place, and the display shifted to something close to 3. I blinked. The ticking paused for a moment, then continued at its normal rhythm. I remember checking my watch. My watch said it was just past 8 p.m. My new old clock showed. The difference felt more than just a normal malfunction. I considered taking it down or trying to open it up, but I was curious. I left it alone that night and went about my evening. Around 10 p.m., I heard a faint creaking noise in my hallway. It sounded like someone stepping slowly on the floorboards. I lived by myself, and I don't usually invite people over, so I felt my heart rate spike. I walked into the hallway, turned on the lights, and saw nothing. The creaking stopped. My living room felt colder somehow. The old clock was still ticking. I checked it again. The minute hand read 59 and the hour hand was stuck between 1. That freaked me out. I stood there staring at it. The numbers on its face seemed to shift. I heard another quick step behind me, but when I spun around, there was no one. I tried to calm down. I told myself it was just my imagination, or the house settling. But something about the ticking sounded uneven. It had a hollow ring to it, like it was ticking inside a metal chamber. I turned on my TV to distract myself. After half an hour, I noticed the ticking stopped completely. I walked over and checked the time on the old clock. The second hand kept spinning, but it wasn't counting normal seconds. It was moving slower, then faster, then slower again. My stomach felt tight. I turned off the TV, listened carefully, and heard what sounded like faint footsteps above me. I don't have a second floor. I looked at the ceiling. My pulse pounded in my temples. I didn't see any cracks or anything abnormal. but the footsteps continued for a few more seconds, then faded away. I barely slept that night. I woke up exhausted the next morning. I checked the clock. The hand showed something close to 9:45 a.m., but my phone said it was 7 a.m. The pendulum still moved, and the second hand kept crawling around. I tapped the glass door, but nothing changed. I considered taking it to a repair shop, but part of me wanted to see if it would keep doing this weird stuff. I left for work trying to forget about it. When I got back in the evening, I felt an unease the moment I opened my door. The place smelled stale. The living room felt darker, like the lights couldn't reach the corners. I turned them all on, but the shadows seemed to press in. The clock read. My phone said 6. The second hand looked like it was counting down to something, but I couldn't tell what. It would stop briefly at the top, then jump forward as if skipping a second or two. A chill ran through my arms. I heard a slow thump near the window, like someone tapping on the glass. I yanked the curtains aside. There was only my yard and the fence in the distance, around 8. I felt a sudden drop in temperature. My breath came out in short huffs. My hands were shaking a little. The clock's ticking grew louder, echoing in the living room. I went to the kitchen to make coffee and heard a scraping sound behind me. It sounded like nails against wood. I froze, then rushed back to the living room. The floor under the clock had thin scratches, as if something with sharp edges had dragged across the wood. I stared at the marks. My heart was thudding. I looked around for any animals. Nothing. The windows were shut, and the doors were locked. I stood still, listening to that ticking. It pulsed against my eardrums. Another day passed, and more scratches appeared by the baseboards. The times on the clock grew more bizarre. Sometimes the hour hand spun in circles while the minute hand barely moved. One afternoon I walked in from work and the clock said 205:15. Then it jumped. I gasped. My throat felt tight. I touched the clock, tried to stop the pendulum with my hand. The metal bob felt freezing. It stung my fingertips like ice. I jerked my hand away and stumbled back. That night I heard faint whispers in the living room, a low conversation, but I couldn't make out the words. I switched on every light I had, but the corners of the room looked darker than usual. It felt like the shadows had waked. I started avoiding that room. I ate my meals in the kitchen or on my bed, but the clock's ticking never seemed to stop. It cut through the walls. In the early mornings I heard it ticking even when I was upstairs in the bathroom. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night, sweating, feeling eyes on me. I'd sit up in bed, hear the floor creak in the hallway. Each time I got up to look, the hallway was empty. The only sound was that slow tick. Then, right at certain moments, it would speed up like a frantic heartbeat. After about a week, the scratches on the floor had deepened. They formed patterns like claw marks in sets of 3 or 4. I tried sanding them out, but new ones appeared the next day. My living room smelled musty. The air felt heavy. I found myself breathing shallowly just to avoid that stale smell. The clock's face showed random numbers, but always with some colon in the middle, like 79 not. Whenever the clock hit those impossible times, I'd hear footsteps around the house. They moved fast, shuffling from one end of the hallway to the other. My skin would prickle. Sometimes I'd feel a breeze against my arms, but the windows remained closed. The worst part was the sense that something moved in the corners of my vision. Late at night, I saw shapes in the reflection of the TV screen, but when I turned around, nothing was there. I sat in my bedroom with the door locked, telling myself these sightings were just my mind playing tricks. But I knew the floors were getting scratched for real. I could see them in plain daylight. I saw faint scuff marks on the walls, like someone's fingers had dragged along the paint. One night, I tried removing the clock from the wall. I unhooked it and carried it out to the garage. My plan was to leave it there. I remember the pendulum swinging wildly as I walked. The second hand jerked back and forth. I set it on a workbench. I covered it with a sheet, then left. For a moment, the house felt quieter. I relaxed. I made dinner, watched some TV, and went to bed feeling a bit better. Around 3 a.m., I jolted awake to the sound of ticking right beside me. My heart pounded. I turned on my bedroom lamp, looked around, and saw no clock. But I heard it. I followed the sound all the way to the living room. The clock was back on the wall, hanging in the exact spot as before. The sheet was gone. The pendulum swung slowly, and the face read year 0, Geo 0. I stared wide-eyed, my legs trembling. I wanted to scream, but my throat felt constricted. I paced around the house, searching for any sign of forced entry or anything that might explain how the clock got back there. All the doors were locked from the inside. The windows were sealed. No footprints or dirt tracked in. I stood there, listening to that slow tick. It sounded louder than my own heartbeat. I turned on every light, but it didn't help. My living room felt like a different place. The corner stayed dark no matter how bright the ceiling lamp glowed. I could feel something in that darkness, like movement waiting for me to look away. I grabbed a hammer from the garage and walked up to the clock, swinging at it. My arms felt leaden, but I managed to crack the glass door. The clock's ticking stopped for half a second, then resumed at a faster pace, as if mocking me. I slammed the hammer again, but my hand slipped, and I dropped it. An icy pain shot through my palms like touching dry ice. I backed away, cursing under my breath. There was a dent in the wood, but the clock kept working. The minute hand jumped from year 0 to 59, then flipped back to 00. Over the next few days, the noises intensified. Doors creaked open on their own. Cabinets slammed shut, and sometimes I'd walk into a room and find every drawer pulled out. The floor near the clock had long gashes now, deep enough that I could fit a coin inside. The smell of mold or rotting wood drifted around, and the shadows seemed taller on the walls, stretching toward the ceiling. Sometimes I heard a low growl, almost like an animal, but not quite. My neck hair stood up every time. My lungs felt tight, and my stomach churned. I had trouble eating. I drank coffee and paced, trying to figure out what to do. I tried to get outside more, but when I returned, I felt the house buzzing with tension. The moment I stepped in, I felt a wave of dread. I'd see the clock reading 1947 or 2312 or some other random hour that didn't match reality. The second hand would skip a beat every time it passed the 12, like it was leaping forward, and almost every evening there came a point when it showed 1366 or 0. My 0. That's when the footsteps started. Sometimes just a few steps. Sometimes it sounded like a full circle around the living room. A few nights ago, I felt something brush my shoulder in the hallway, but I couldn't see it. My heart raced. I stumbled back against the wall, panting, until the pressure vanished. I started sleeping in my clothes and boots, ready to run outside if it got any worse. But each morning I found myself still inside, always too exhausted to make a move. The clock's presence dug into my mind. I felt like it was pulling the house into its own strange schedule, a schedule that had nothing to do with normal hours. I tried calling a few repair shops, explaining I had a broken antique clock. They offered to fix it if I brought it in, but I didn't dare try to move it again after that night in the garage. I was afraid it might reappear on the wall or make something worse happen. Yesterday, something new happened. Around 1 p.m., my phone's time, I noticed the clock said 14. The second hand started spinning in circles, clicking rapidly. I froze and watched. The floor beneath the clock bulged slightly, like the wood was lifting. My chest tightened, my hands felt sweaty. I inched closer, not sure what I'd see. Then the bulge flattened again, but the scratches on the floor got deeper. I heard a raspy scraping sound, like something was trying to claw its way up. I jumped back, nearly tripping over my coffee table. The second hand stopped spinning and returned to a normal pace. I spent the rest of the afternoon feeling like I was being watched from the corners of the room. Right now it's late. My phone says it's 10:45. The clock reads 000, and the ticking is loud enough that it vibrates in my skull. Every once in a while I hear slow footsteps on the stairs leading to the attic, but I don't have an attic. I keep looking at the ceiling, expecting it to open or crack. The walls feel damp. My throat is dry. My eyes sting from lack of sleep. I can see the floorboards near the clock shifting, almost warping in small pulses. Each time the second hand hits the top, there's a faint groan from the wood. The clock's glass door is still cracked, but it doesn't seem to matter. I'm standing in my living room, writing this down on my phone, because I can't think of anything else to do. I feel a breeze on my neck, but all my windows are closed. The corners are dark no matter how many lamps I switch on. I keep hearing little scrapes on the floor like small knives scratching. My heart pounds, and my legs feel weak. I'm not sure what's going to happen in the next few minutes. I can see these shapes fully, but sense them at the edges of my vision. My eyes keep darting around, trying to catch movement. The shadows seem to shift. There it is again, a slow creaking noise in the far corner, followed by a sound like a soft hiss. I'm breathing fast, My palms are sweaty and my pulse throbs in my ears. The clock just chimed. I didn't even know it had a chime. It sounded like a deep bell. Once, twice, 3 times. Now the second hand is twitching at the top, counting something that isn't time. My chest feels tight. The floor under the clock groans, as if something is wedging itself upward. I'm going to grab my phone charger and get out for the night. I don't care if the clock appears back on the wall tomorrow. I need to breathe fresh air. I can sleep here. Every muscle in my body is tense. My throat is dry, and I can't swallow. My ears are ringing. The footsteps won't stop. They're circling through the living room. Maybe 2 or 3 sets of them. I can't see anything but feel it. I sense shapes shifting behind the sofa. I hear scratching on the wooden floor. The tension in my neck is almost unbearable. I'm going to the door now. The clock is still showing 000, and the pendulum is swinging faster than before. There's a humming sound coming from inside its case, like a swarm of insects. I'm stepping away from the living room. The boards under my feet creak loudly, but I'm moving as fast as I can. I can't look back. I can't stand the thought of what might be behind me. My skin tingles, in gripping my phone so hard that my knuckles are white. I don't know if leaving will help, but I have to try. I'm reaching for the doorknob. The footsteps sound closer, right behind me. I'm turning it now. I'm opening the door. There's a cold gust of air hitting me. My heart is hammering. That clock's ticking echoes in my ears. I'm stepping outside. I'm not staying here another minute. I don't care what that clock does next. I just want to breathe and clear my head. I'm done. I remember the exact moment I found that symbol. I was in my garage late in the afternoon, trying to refinish an old oak desk I'd picked up at an estate sale. I had flipped the tabletop over to sand the underside. Right there, tucked in a corner under a layer of dust, was this weird circle carved into the wood. It looked scratched, not chiseled. The lines inside it didn't connect in any smooth pattern. They went in different directions, like someone hadn't planned it carefully. I leaned in, wiped the area with a rag, and felt a prickly sensation in my scalp. My arms twitched, and a wave of goosebumps ran along my forearms. I didn't think anything of it at first. I just noted it was odd, and I made a mental note to look it up later. I flipped the tabletop right side up again and kept sanding. That evening I decided to research the symbol. I typed a vague description into an online search engine. Nothing clear popped up. I tried different keywords: circle with disconnected lines, occult circle symbol, ritual carved circle. Most of what I got were random images that didn't match. I decided to put my phone down and get some rest. My shoulders were sore from all the sanding, and the fumes from the stain had left my eyes feeling gritty. I ate a quick dinner, turned on some TV for background noise, and went to bed. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I kept thinking about that circle. Even though I didn't see it anywhere online, I couldn't shake the feeling that it meant something important. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up with my heart racing. I didn't have a clear dream, but I felt like someone had been watching me. I got up, splashed some water on my face, and tried to calm down. I walked into my living room. The place felt quiet, darker than usual. My own footsteps sounded louder on the hardwood floor. My breath felt short. I looked around and convinced myself everything was normal. Eventually, I returned to bed and forced myself to sleep. The next morning, I went back to the garage and focused on the desk again. I ran my hand along its edges, checking for chips. I remember thinking how beautiful the oak green was. It had this natural color that I liked. Not too light, not too dark. I lowered my head underneath to examine the carving one more time. I wanted to see if I could sand it out. When I stuck my head under there, that chill came back. My neck tightened, and I pulled back. It felt like the space under the desk was colder than the rest of the garage. The hair on my arms stood up. I wondered if I was just psyching myself out. I turned away, picked up the sandpaper, and tried to focus on the rest of the desk. But I kept glancing at that spot. Later in the day, while I was applying varnish, something flickered in the corner of my eye. It looked like a dark shape standing in the back of the garage. I turned quickly and there was nothing but some stacked boxes and a ladder. My heart thumped hard in my chest. I laughed it off, told myself it was just my imagination. I finished the varnish job, locked up the garage, and went inside to clean the brush. My hands were trembling a bit, but I ignored it. That evening I decided to do some deeper research. I looked into old books about occult symbols. I found a few ebooks that talked about circles, triangles, pentagrams, and other shapes used in rituals. Nothing matched perfectly, but I saw some references to hand-scratched circles that indicated doorways or conduits for unknown entities. One text in particular mentioned that incomplete lines inside a circle could be a sign of an unfinished invocation. That made me uneasy. I felt my stomach tighten. I could feel a slight tension in my temples, like a small headache forming. But I was curious, so I kept reading until my eyes felt strained. As I sat there at my dining table, flipping through pages on my laptop, I started feeling like someone is in the room with me. I kept turning around, expecting to see a neighbor or friend behind me, but there was no one. The overhead light cast shadows against the walls. It felt too quiet. The only sound was the faint hum of the fridge. My heart was beating faster than normal, and my palms felt damp against the table. I noticed my breath quickening. I caught myself gripping the laptop's edges too hard. I told myself to calm down, but the uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. When I tried to sleep, my mind kept circling back to that symbol. I pictured the lines, the scratched edges. My dreams, if I had any, felt like black holes. I remember waking up every few hours, sweaty and anxious, but not sure why. In the morning, I decided to test out the desk. I moved it into my small office space inside the house. I set my computer on it, placed some papers around and tried to work. It was better lit in there, less spooky than the garage. I sat down and started typing an email. That's when I first saw something out of the corner of my eye again. I'm not a person who sees things. I don't have any history of hallucinations, but I swear I saw a shape at the edge of my vision, just near the doorframe. I spun my chair around. Nothing. My heart pounded. I stood up, walked to the door. It was empty. I checked the living room. No one. I went back to my desk and sat down again. I felt tense, like my muscles were on high alert. I tried to focus on my work. After a few minutes, I felt something behind me. I glanced over my shoulder but saw nothing. Still, my neck stiffened, and I got that same wave of goosebumps. Over the next couple of days, these little glimpses of shadows happened more often. Sometimes I'd be writing notes or paying bills online, and I'd see a vague silhouette pass by the window or stand in a corner. Each time I turned to look, it was gone. My chest felt tight, and my breathing became shallow. I started sleeping with lights on in the hallway. I also took breaks from working at the desk, but I always got drawn back to it. Part of me wanted to figure out what was happening. Another part of me just couldn't resist the urge to keep searching for information about that carving. I visited a local used bookstore that specialized in older texts. I told the owner I was looking for something on obscure symbols. He showed me a few worn volumes about secret societies and old mystical orders. Most of it looked like nonsense, but I found one book that had a section on hidden carvings in furniture. It discussed how certain groups in the past would etch symbols on common household items to create a link to invisible entities. The text described how these symbols could act like keys to open a channel between the physical world and other dimensions. As I read, I felt my heartbeat growing stronger. My hands started to sweat. The store felt stuffy. I bought the book and hurried out. That evening, I read more about it. My mind kept returning to the idea that someone had intentionally carved that circle. It wasn't an accident. It could have been put there long ago, maybe by someone who practiced dark rituals. I got restless and decided to take a closer look at the desk with a flashlight. I lay down on the floor, aimed the light at the carving, and studied every groove. I could see faint marks where the tool had scraped the wood. The pattern had a slight tilt to it. I reached out and traced it with my fingertip. My skin tingled, and I felt my pulse in my fingertips. I got up quickly, feeling like I'd touched something I shouldn't have. After that, I started having more intense experiences. Shadows around the house became sharper. They weren't just shapes in the corner of my eye. Sometimes they looked like dark silhouettes standing in corners facing me. I couldn't see any facial features, but I sensed they were staring. My body would tighten. My mouth would go dry, and I'd feel a surge of adrenaline. At times I heard faint whispers. They were soft, like a breeze, but they formed words I couldn't quite understand. It was like listening to a conversation through thick walls. My mind tried to make sense of it, but I only picked up bits of sound. One night I was reading another ancient text about protective seals, hoping to find a way to counter this situation. As I turned a page, I heard a voice right next to my ear. It was a low whisper that said something like, "You're close." I jumped out of my chair and dropped the book. My hands were shaking and my heart felt like it might burst through my chest. I spun around, scanning the room, but there was nothing there. I was sweating and I felt cold at the same time. My legs were trembling, and I backed away from the desk. I picked up the book from the floor, but my hand was unsteady, and I nearly dropped it again. I went to the bathroom to splash water on my face. My reflection in the mirror showed bloodshot eyes, dark circles under them. I breathed in and out, trying to slow my racing pulse. My thoughts were jumbled. I kept thinking that I'd gone too far, that I shouldn't keep reading. But a strange drive pushed me to continue. Each new detail I learned made me feel like I was uncovering a puzzle. These shadows seemed stronger, like they were feeding off every bit of knowledge I gained. I recognized that it was dangerous, but I felt a compulsion to see it through. On the 5th day after discovering the symbol, the shadows began speaking more clearly. Their whispers felt closer to ear. They said things about power, secrets, and forbidden knowledge. They urged me to open more books, to explore more about that circle. My head felt crowded with their voices at times. My hands shook whenever I tried to write anything down. I'd hear them telling me not to stop looking. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. My chest felt tight. My jaw clenched. I caught myself biting my lower lip until it hurt. I tried turning on every light in the house, hoping that bright illumination would make the shadows vanish. It didn't work. I saw outlines of them even in daylight. They hovered near my desk and paced near my couch. At one point, I decided to take a break from the research. I hid the books in a closet and locked them away. For a moment, it felt like the house got quieter. But when I returned to the desk to write an email, I saw one of those figures standing in my office doorway. It didn't move, it just stood there, that tall black shape with undefined edges. I stood up, my throat tight, my legs weak. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it. I forced myself to walk toward it. My eyes teared up because I was so tense. As I approached, it faded like smoke. I heard a faint hiss, like air leaking from a tire. Then it was gone. I leaned on the door frame, panting. My mouth was dry. My t-shirt was soaked in sweat around the collar. I realized I was gripping the doorknob so hard my knuckles were white. I let go, stepped back, and shut my eyes. My mind buzzed with the possibility that this entity was now free to roam my house. That night, I considered getting rid of the desk altogether. I even went to my garage to look for tools so I could take it apart or burn it. But as soon as I looked at the desk, a wave of dizziness hit me. My vision blurred, and I felt like I might collapse. I gripped the edge of a shelf to steady myself. It felt like the shadows were pressing in, blocking my thoughts and telling me I couldn't destroy it. My breathing became ragged, and my scalp tingled. I shut my eyes for a moment and forced myself to back away. My knees felt weak, and I sank onto a nearby stool. I stayed there until the feeling passed. I grabbed my phone and searched for any local experts on occult symbols. I found a forum where people discussed runes and sigils. One user mentioned a library in the next town over that had rare tomes. The next morning, I drove there and found a small reading room with shelves of dusty old books. I flipped through several, focusing on anything that described carved circles with lines inside. After a few hours, I spotted a chapter about malignant watchers linked to incomplete circles. The text described them as entities that feed on a person's attention and knowledge. The more you learn about them, the more solid they become. Reading that, my stomach churned. I shut the book and stared at the table. My pulse raced. It felt like an explanation for everything I'd been experiencing. I hurried home with the idea that I might find a way to block them. Another passage in that text mentioned that if the circle remained incomplete, you could sever the connection by physically breaking the symbol or removing it from the item. It warned that the process was risky, and the watchers might try to stop you. When I walked into my house, I felt an immediate heaviness, like the air was thick. My vision felt slightly off, like the corners of the room were dark. I approached the desk, reached under it, and traced the lines of the carving with my fingers. My hand trembled. I felt a sharp jolt in my arm, like a static shock. I knew I had to get rid of it, or at least break that part of the wood. I grabbed a chisel from the garage, knelt down and placed it against the carved lines. My hands were sweaty, and I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. I struck the chisel with a hammer. A chunk of wood splintered off. As soon as it broke, I felt a surge of cold air around me. My teeth chattered for a second. I struck again, determined to break every trace of the circle. Each hit sent vibrations up my arm, and I heard low whispers around me. They sounded angry. My shoulders tensed, and a ringing filled my ears. The shadows flickered at the corners of my vision, but I kept going. Finally, the carving was completely destroyed. There was just a ragged patch of raw wood. I stood up, breathing hard, my legs shaky. The room felt different, like a weight had been lifted. I looked around. The shadows were gone. The silence was so intense I could hear my own breath. I ran my hand across my forehead, wiping off sweat. My mouth was still dry, but I felt like I could breathe again. I moved away from the desk, leaning against a wall. My pulse gradually slowed. My head ached a little, but it was the tension draining out. I stayed there for a few moments, just listening to the emptiness. I'm not sure what those shadows really were, or how close they came to taking over my life. They felt real, like they had a presence beyond my imagination. I still have that desk, but now it has a big scar under the tabletop where I chiseled out the carving. I keep the lights on around it whenever I'm working. Poor thing. I haven't seen any of those shapes since then. I do catch myself glancing at the floor every now and then, half expecting to see a shadow move. But the house is quiet now. I locked away the books, and I don't plan to read about that symbol again. I don't need to. I learned enough to last me a lifetime. Sometimes I feel a chill when I think about how those shadows seem to feed on my curiosity. But I'm done with that circle. I don't want to poke around in things I don't understand anymore. For now, I'm staying away from strange symbols and anything that hints at unknown entities. I'm finally sleeping better, and the air in my house feels normal. Whenever I sit at that desk to write, I remind myself that I'm in control, and as long as that carving is destroyed, I believe those shadows will stay wherever they belong. I've never liked creaking noises at night, but I used to shrug them off. I assumed they came from the house settling or from old pipes in the walls. That changed when I started hearing heavier footsteps above my bedroom around 2. They weren't random taps or scraping sounds. They felt deliberate, almost pacing back and forth, like someone was walking slowly just a few feet above my head. Now I can sleep without thinking about those steps in the attic. I tried ignoring them at first, but they kept growing louder each night until I couldn't push the noise out of my mind. I decided I had to go up there and see what was happening. I live alone in a small 2-story house. The attic is right above the second floor, and there's a hatch in the hallway ceiling. The hallway is narrow with one bare bulb that lights everything in a dull glow. The first time I heard the footsteps, I told myself it could be an animal, a raccoon or a possum, but I had never heard an animal with such heavy footfalls, almost human in weight. The next night, when the steps started again around the same time, I lay in bed, holding my breath. The floor above me creaked in a pattern, slow, then paused, then continued. It felt like someone pacing. My stomach twisted. I got out of bed and went into the hallway. I pulled down the attic ladder and flipped on the light switch near the hatch. I expected to see a typical attic space with dusty boxes, maybe some spider webs. I pushed my head through the opening and looked around. The single light bulb in the center lit up a cramped space filled with old furniture, a couple of stacked boxes, and a stale odor that reminded me of cardboard and mold. The dust in the air made me sneeze. I climbed up and stood still, scanning the area. I didn't see or hear any sign of a person or an animal. The entire area felt still. The only sound was my own breathing and the hum of the house's electricity. I moved slowly through the narrow paths between furniture, checking behind some boxes, nudging an old dresser, and peering into corners. Nothing moved. The footsteps weren't happening while I was up there, but there was a strange tension in the air, like static before a storm. My neck felt prickly. I remember thinking I was imagining it, so I forced myself to shrug it off. Then, as I stepped over to an old trunk, I heard a light thud. It came from a spot a few feet behind me. My chest tightened. I spun around, shining a small flashlight I'd brought along. Nothing stood there. I forced out a slow breath and told myself it might have been the house settling, or maybe I kicked something without noticing. I kept looking around for a few more minutes. Eventually I returned to my bedroom, lowered the attic ladder, and tried to fall asleep. My mind wouldn't quiet down, but I eventually dozed off in the early hours of the morning. The next few nights, the footsteps came back, sounding even heavier. I lay there trying to decide if I was losing it or if something real was happening. On the fourth night, I reached a point where I couldn't handle the uncertainty anymore. I got up as soon as I heard the footsteps. I grabbed my flashlight and a small crowbar for peace of mind. I crept into the hallway, pulled down the attic ladder, and climbed up. The bulb above me flickered slightly. I felt a weird tension in my stomach. The air was thicker than usual, like I was in a room that hadn't been opened in decades. My footsteps kicked up dust, and I heard the floor creaking under me. The steps continued behind me, matching my own pace. They were softer than mine, but definitely there. I turned my head quickly. Again, nothing was there, but this time, my scalp tingled. I felt a faint touch on my shoulder. It was a light press, like fingertips brushing against my jacket. I jerked my body around, shining my flashlight, but I saw nothing except dust motes. I swear my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My chest felt tight, and I found myself breathing faster. I stood there trying to calm down. My mouth went dry and my palms were sweaty, making it hard to keep a good grip on my flashlight. I tried calling out, "Hello, is anyone here?" My voice sounded shaky in my ears. I got no answer. I waited, letting the silence stretch on. Then I took a few more steps. The footsteps continued behind me. They matched me step for step. I turned around again, this time faster, but it didn't help. I saw nothing except old boxes, a couple of folded chairs, and a large mirror leaning against the wall. I felt a chill running down my spine, so I headed back downstairs. Once I was in my bedroom, I closed the attic hatch and tried to breathe normally. I didn't sleep well. Every little sound made me tense up, expecting those footsteps to start again. By morning, I decided to set up some cameras. I wanted proof, one way or another, that I wasn't going crazy. I went out and bought a few cheap security cameras with night vision. I spent the afternoon placing them around the attic, pointing them at different areas. One camera was near the hatch, aimed at the center of the room. Another was on a shelf, watching the far corner. A third one was attached to a post near the mirror. I made sure each camera had enough battery and memory to record through the night. I tested them to confirm they were working. That night, I felt a bit more confident, thinking I would see something on the video, if there was indeed something up there. I forced myself to go to bed at a normal time. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up. At first, I thought I heard a scratching sound, but it might have been just my dream. Then I heard the footsteps again. They seemed heavier, and I could sense a certain rhythm. I got out of bed and glanced at the hallway ceiling. My heart was racing, but I told myself to wait until morning to check the cameras. I didn't sleep much after that. When the sun came up, I went into the attic. Everything looked the same, boxes in place, nothing overturned. I gathered the cameras and brought them downstairs to my living room. I connected them to my computer and started watching the footage. For the first few minutes, all I saw was an empty attic. Dust floated in the air, drifting around in the dim light from the bulb I had left on. Then, in the camera near the mirror, there was a short flicker. The screen darkened for half a second. When it came back, I saw a faint shadow. It moved quickly across the frame, almost crossing from the right side to the left, then vanished. My throat tightened. I scrubbed back and forth, trying to see details, but it was just a dark blur. On the camera near the hatch, I saw another flicker around the same time. This time, the shadow paused for a split second, then shot across the room. It passed right through a wooden beam as if it weren't even there. My hands were shaking as I paused the frame. In that brief moment, the shadow appeared to be looking directly at the lens. I couldn't see any face or eyes, but it felt like it was facing the camera. I turned off the playback for a moment. My heart pounded, and I could feel the sweat on my forehead. I wanted to find a logical explanation, but I had no idea how to explain a shape crossing solid wood. I checked the other camera videos. In one of them, I heard faint footsteps. I saw dust swirling around, but no clear shape emerged. I sat there replaying the footage over and over. The clock on my computer said it was nearly lunchtime, but I didn't feel hungry. I felt shaken. Those cameras showed something I couldn't explain. I decided to set them up again that night, but I also considered calling someone for help. Maybe a friend who could sit with me and see this thing in person. But I felt embarrassed, worried they'd think I was losing my mind. So I decided to handle it alone. That evening I went back into the attic before it got dark. I moved the boxes away from the walls, leaving more open space. I wanted fewer hiding spots if there was some intruder playing a trick. I swept the floor a bit, stirring up clouds of dust that made me cough. Then I set the cameras back in place, checking their angles again. I placed an extra battery pack near one of them so it could record longer. I turned off the attic light and went downstairs. I locked the hatch from below, which wasn't normally possible, but I rigged up a small latch that could hold it shut. Then I tried to relax on the couch, flipping channels on the TV without really paying attention. Around midnight, I felt my eyelids getting heavy, so I decided to go to bed. I switched off the TV and walked up the stairs. The house felt cold, though the heater was on. I could see my breath in the hallway, which was strange. I touched the radiator, and it was warm. Yet the air around me felt cold enough to make my skin prickle. I hurried into my bedroom and slipped under the covers. I kept the light on. About an hour later, I heard the footsteps again. I stared at the ceiling, feeling my pulse in my ears. This time, they sounded different. They started at one end of the attic and moved all the way to the other end, then stopped. My body tensed, waiting for the next steps. Nothing happened. After a few minutes, they started again, slower this time. I could almost picture them stepping carefully over items, but I knew the attic was cleared out in the middle. I stayed in bed, not wanting to go up there in the dark. When morning came, I felt relieved to see daylight. I rushed up the ladder to get the cameras. The air still felt heavy, and I saw my breath again, even though it was daytime. I grabbed the devices and hurried downstairs. Once again, I plugged them into my computer. The recording started off normal, just an empty attic. After about an hour of footage, the camera near the hatch showed a quick movement. The shape darted across the frame, heading toward the mirror. The next camera angle caught a glimpse of a dark form passing by. Then it paused in front of the camera, as if it were staring. The screen flickered. The shape vanished, then reappeared a few seconds later at the opposite end of the attic. I heard a faint scraping noise in the audio, but I couldn't figure out what caused it. My stomach clenched. I noticed each time it appeared, there was a sudden burst of static. The audio spiked, then died down. I rewound several times, trying to see some clear detail, but I couldn't. There was only a vague outline that looked humanoid. No distinct features. It was like a shadow, but it moved on its own and didn't match any light source. Watching it made my scalp crawl. I turned off my computer and took a walk around the block. The normal daylight sounds, cars passing, people talking, helped me calm down. But I knew I had to face the fact that something unexplained was in my attic. That night I decided to confront it directly. I went up with a flashlight, a handheld video camera, and a firm resolve. I stepped onto the attic boards, feeling them shift under my weight. The overhead bulb flickered when I tugged the chain. I started filming with my camera. I panned around slowly, catching the boxes, the furniture, and the mirror. Then I walked to the far side, where the shape had appeared. My heart thumped. I could hear each breath I took. The air felt cold. The floor creaked under me with each step. Suddenly I heard a heavy thump on the other side of the attic. I turned, but the mirror was in the way. The mirror was angled so I could see part of the room reflected in it. I saw something shift across the reflection. It was dark. My stomach flipped. I took a shaky step forward, and I felt the static in the air. My hair stood on end, and my skin tingled. A sound emerged, like soft footsteps circling me. I turned again, trying to film everything. My flashlight flickered, and the camera screen glitched. The steps were behind me. I spun around, but there was only the old trunk and some chairs. Then I felt a light tap on my back. My camera shook in my hand. I swung the flashlight to the spot where I felt the tap, but saw empty air. My breathing grew fast. My pulse hammered in my ears. I knew I should leave. I backed away toward the hatch. The boards beneath me groaned. Each step I took, I heard another step behind me, delayed by just a fraction of a second, like an echo. The single bulb above me buzzed and flickered. My flashlight dimmed for a moment, then returned to full brightness. I kept filming, refusing to lower the camera even though my hands were shaking. Then the attic light went out completely. I was left with my flashlight beam, which felt too narrow in the darkness. The space around me looked endless and threatening. I inched my way to the hatch, feeling the ladder with the back of my heel. When I found it, I climbed down as fast as I could without falling. I shut the hatch above me and locked it again. Now I'm sitting in my living room, the camera in front of me. My heart rate is finally slowing down. I can still feel that cold weight in the air. Even down here, I sense that something is in the attic, pacing back and forth. My legs are shaky, and my hands feel like they've been gripping something for hours. I don't know what my next move is. I have footage of a shape that crosses solid walls. I have these sounds of heavy steps that vanish whenever I shine a light. I feel a tap on my back when there's no one there. I can sleep with those sounds overhead. Every time I close my eyes, I imagine that shape moving above me, waiting for me to come back up. I've thought about leaving the house and never returning, but it's my home, and I don't want to give it up to something I can't even see clearly. I also don't want to invite anyone else into this place until I figure out what's going on. I keep looking toward the ceiling, half expecting the footsteps to start again right now. My body is still tense, ready to jump. I don't know how many more nights I can stand this. There's something in my attic, and it isn't going away. It follows me, matches my pace, and touches me when I'm not looking. I have video evidence that's impossible to explain. The only thing I'm sure of is that this presence is real, and I can't ignore it anymore. I left the city before sunrise with a stiff neck, an aching head, and a duffel bag stuffed with clothes I barely folded. My car's back seat held a small cooler with water and a few sandwiches. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I just pulled onto the highway and pressed the gas pedal, determined to get away. I wanted to avoid main roads, so I took every side route I found on my map. I wasn't looking for scenery. I only wanted quiet stretches of asphalt and the promise of a small village at the end of it. I felt worn down from traffic and street noise. My shoulders were sore from tension. I needed space to breathe. I needed something different. After a few hours of driving, the GPS on my phone lost its signal. I tossed the device onto the passenger seat and decided to trust the old map I had tucked under the visor. The weather was warm, but not hot enough to need air conditioning. I drove with my window open, letting the wind dry the sweat on my brow. My car was running fine at first. The engine hummed, and the tires rolled along the cracked pavement without a problem. The roads were empty. I passed a single gas station with broken neon lights. Nobody stood behind the counter, so I kept going without a full tank. I figured I had enough fuel to reach the next town. About an hour after that, I saw something unusual in the distance. The road stretched out in front of me in a long straight line, but the trees on both sides looked twisted. Their trunks bent toward the road, their branches curled upward. I squinted because it was hard to make sense of their shapes. They reminded me of old wires that had been bent by hand, but I don't want to compare them to anything poetic. They were just warped trees with rough bark and no leaves. The sky above seemed a little darker there, even though it was still midday. I checked my map again. According to the paper, this road should cut through some forested area and eventually lead to a small settlement. There was no other path shown on the map, so I stayed on course. I kept my eyes on the road, but I noticed movement on both sides. The shapes were black or gray, darting behind trees. I heard a rustling sound, as if something scraped against tree bark. My grip on the steering wheel tightened and my heartbeat sped up. I tried to ignore the shadows. They didn't look like animals. They didn't have a clear outline that I could identify, but they seemed to match my car's speed, moving in short bursts. My throat felt dry. My ears were on high alert. Every time the wind blew, I jumped a bit. I stared straight ahead, hoping to see the end of that long stretch of road. Suddenly, my car jerked. The engine sputtered. I felt a jolt in the seat, like the car had lost power for half a second. Then, it recovered. I sat forward, checking the gauges. The temperature was fine. The fuel level was okay. I eased off the gas and then pressed it again. The engine returned to normal, but I was sweating now, not from heat, but from the sudden worry that my car might break down in that place. I glanced over my shoulder. The road behind me was empty. The trees looked the same there, twisted and leaning inward. I had the urge to turn around, but I needed to reach that small village and the map showed it straight ahead. I drove another mile or so before the engine sputtered again. This time it lasted longer. The lights on the dashboard flickered. The car slowed down, and I felt a cold sense of dread tightening my stomach. I pulled over and turned off the ignition. The wind outside was still. I heard my pulse pounding in my ears, and noticed a slight trembling in my hands. My mouth felt parched, so I took a sip of water from the cooler. Then I popped the hood. Steam didn't rise from the engine, and I didn't see any leaks. Nothing looked out of place. I tapped a few hoses, checked the oil dipstick. Everything seemed normal. While I stood there, the silence made me uneasy. There were no birds. I only heard faint rustling in the distance, like something was scraping across the ground. I walked around to the front of the car and looked down at the gravel near the shoulder. I saw strange marks in the dirt. They looked like lines in sets of 4, but not footprints, more like scratches or drag marks. Each set of marks ran parallel, as if something with claws had passed by. I didn't see any distinct paw shapes. It wasn't an animal track I recognized. I stood there a moment trying to figure out if it was fresh. It looked new because I could see loose gravel scattered at the edges. My chest felt tight. My instincts told me to hurry. I got back in my car, turned the ignition, and it started right up. I let out a shaky breath and steered back onto the road. The lane ahead still went in a straight line and the trees continued on both sides without any breaks. The shadows among the trunks were still there, rushing forward. I tried not to stare at them for too long. My stomach was in knots. My mind was racing with thoughts about breaking down and being stuck on that road. My left foot tapped nervously on the floorboard. My knuckles were white from gripping the wheel tightly. I took short breaths and blinked away sweat that dripped into my eyes. As I kept going, the road felt longer still. I checked my odometer to see how many miles I'd covered. The numbers indicated I should have reached at least a bend or something by now, based on my map scale. But the straight line continued uninterrupted. My eyes burned from staring ahead. I didn't see any turnoff or side road. There was no sign for a town or gas station. It was only the same warped trees and the same shadows dancing behind them. I glanced at the time on my phone. The screen showed no signal, and the hour it had shown before remained unchanged. I wasn't sure if it was glitching. The battery icon was stuck at the same percentage. I stuffed the phone in the cup holder. I felt a tightness in my chest again. Then, for a third time, the engine sputtered. The car's power gave out completely, and I had to coast to a stop on the side. I turned off the ignition, turned it on again, and the engine cranked but wouldn't start. I swore under my breath and slammed my hands on the steering wheel. I stared at the road ahead through the windshield. It was so straight that I couldn't see any horizon, just that line fading into more trees. My shirt was soaked around the collar. My eyes darted left to right, scanning the road and the shoulder, looking for movement. I climbed out of the car, keeping the door open in case I needed to jump back inside. The air felt still again. My ears felt like they were straining for any sound. I could hear my own breathing fast and shallow. I could feel my pulse pounding in my temples. I opened the hood once more, jiggled the spark plug wires, checked a few connections, and then tried the ignition again. It sputtered and then roared back to life. I exhaled, slammed the hood shut, and jumped into the driver's seat. I pressed the gas, and the car moved forward. My shoulders ached from tension. As I drove, I tried to measure the distance. I picked a reference point on the odometer and told myself that if this was still the same road after another 5 miles, I'd consider turning around. But 5 miles passed, and nothing changed. The trees were still tight on both sides. No exit, no break in the monotony. I tried to do a U-turn, swinging the wheel all the way. There wasn't much space, but I managed to angle the car back around. I headed in the opposite direction, feeling a small surge of hope that I could leave this place the same way I came. But after about 10 minutes, I realized the scenery hadn't changed. The trees looked identical. I didn't pass my earlier stops or see the gas station from hours ago. It looked like the same stretch of twisted trunks. The shadows still flickered among them. My chest clenched again. I couldn't figure out if I was losing my mind or if the road was doing something to keep me there. I stopped the car. My legs felt weak, so I stayed seated. I looked at the clock on my dashboard, but the display was stuck at the same time I had noticed earlier. The numbers hadn't moved. I rested my head against the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing. When I glanced in the rearview mirror, I thought I saw a figure standing between the trees, but it was gone when I blinked. My heart raced. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I pulled my foot off the brake and pressed the accelerator. The car responded with a bit of a lurch, but it moved. I decided to keep going forward again, hoping I'd find some break in that endless line of trees. The day dragged on. At least it felt like it was dragging on, although the sky didn't change much. I didn't see the sun move across the sky. It hung there, hidden behind a dull layer of cloud, or maybe hidden by the thick branches above. My water supply was running low. I sipped it sparingly, trying to keep some for later. My stomach growled, but I ignored it. My main worry was that the car would die for good, and I'd be stuck walking among those twisted trunks. Thinking about that made my hands shake again. My heart hammered. and I took several quick breaths to calm down. After another indefinite period, I saw a faint sign up ahead. It stood crooked on the side of the road, leaning as if it had been knocked by a strong wind. I slowed down to read it. The letters were chipped, but I could make out the name of a village. It matched the place I intended to find. I felt a surge of relief and pressed the gas, moving closer. The sign pointed straight ahead, so I continued. The road still looked the same, but now there was at least some indication that I was headed somewhere real. I kept glancing at the side of the road, expecting more signs or maybe a building in the distance. A few minutes later, the trees began to spread out. They weren't as tight against the road, and their trunks didn't look as twisted. The shadows among them seemed fewer. I could see small patches of grass and weeds. My heart started to slow down. I clenched the steering wheel, waiting for another engine sputter, but it didn't happen. The car kept going. I gritted my teeth, waiting for something else to jump out or cause me to stop, but all I heard was the soft hum of my tires on the asphalt. Then I turned a slight bend, and the never-ending straight line was behind me. My shoulders sagged in relief. I saw a few wooden houses in the distance. Their roofs looked worn, and the paint was peeling. But they were houses, and that meant people. I drove into the small village center. There was a single dirt lot next to a building with a faded sign indicating it was a store or cafe. I parked and shut off the engine. I sat there for a moment, letting the tension drain from my muscles. My back and arms hurt from the stress. My shirt was soaked with sweat. My eyes ached from staring down that road. I didn't want to look behind me at the path I had just escaped. I just wanted to find a safe place to stand on solid ground, maybe talk to a local about a motel or a place to rest. I got out of the car, slammed the door shut, and took a moment to stretch my arms overhead. The air felt calmer here. I saw a woman crossing the street, but I didn't hear much else. There were no loud voices, no music, no heavy traffic. It was almost too quiet, but at least it wasn't that twisting forest. I walked to the store entrance, ignoring the urge to look back at the road. My eyes were fixed on the door in the promise of another person's voice. My legs still felt shaky, but I pushed through. I grabbed the handle and opened it. Inside, there was a small counter with a cash register. The smell of dusty shelves and old wood hit me. The woman behind the counter looked at me with slight curiosity. I wiped my forehead and asked if there was a place to stay in the village. She nodded and pointed me in the direction of a local boarding house a few blocks away. I thanked her, bought a bottle of cold water, and walked back outside. My car was still parked there. I couldn't help a quick glance at the road. It was silent. The trees were at a distance, not so menacing now that I wasn't trapped among them. I felt relief wash over me, but a raw tension also lingered inside my chest. My body still held the memory of those strange shadows and scratching noises. My mind kept replaying the engine sputtering. I could still feel the dryness in my mouth and tightness in my shoulders, but I was out. I took a deep breath and climbed back into the car. This time, the engine started without any stutter. I drove slowly through the village streets until I found the boarding house. It was a modest building with an old sign. I parked, turned off the engine, and got out. My legs wobbled when I stood up. I walked to the door, hoping I could settle in, get a warm meal, and calm my nerves. I didn't plan to stay there forever, but for now I just needed rest. I'm not sure what happened on that road. I'm not sure if I went crazy or if there was something in those trees that wanted me to stay. All I know is that my heart is still pounding, and my head is still throbbing. My skin prickles when I think about those claw marks. I don't have answers, and I don't really want to dig deeper. I'm just glad I found this village. I'm glad I can close my eyes tonight without hearing that engine sputter again in the middle of that dark, twisted stretch of highway. And if someone asks why I left the city, I might say I just needed peace. But the real reason is that I wanted to escape everything that was suffocating me. Now, I'm not sure if I found the peace I was looking for, but at least I escaped that one endless road. And that's enough for me right now. I never expected to feel such unease in a place that carried my own family name. From the moment I stepped onto that old property, something felt off. The air was heavy, and the silence around me felt like a warning. My grandfather used to talk about this land with pride, and I always thought of it as a peaceful escape from the busy city. But the day I arrived alone, the property seemed different, like it was ready to show me something it had kept hidden for years. I drove up the dirt road and parked near the aging farmhouse. When I got out, the first thing I noticed was the wind. It felt stale. I heard no birds, no rustling of leaves, just a low hum that might have been in my head. The ground around the house looked dry, even though we had a few days of rain recently. The paint on the walls had peeled away in large patches, and the windows were covered in dust. I walked around to check if anything needed immediate repairs. The place looked worn, but stable enough for a short visit. I planned to stay a week at most just to handle some paperwork and see if there was anything of value left on the property. In the back, near an old tool shed, I spotted a circular mound of stones. I remembered my grandfather once saying that there was a well. He used to say it had dried up years ago, but he never gave details. I saw thick metal chains wrapped around the stones, and on top were more stones piled in a messy way. It didn't look like a simple well cover. It looked barricaded. I walked closer. The metal felt cold even in the afternoon sun. When I leaned in, I thought I heard something. A low groan or vibration. I pressed my ear against the top stone. My heart began to race. It sounded like a distant moan coming from deep below. I stood back feeling a chill. I told myself it was just the wind. I shook off the feeling and went back to the farmhouse. The inside was dusty but familiar. I recognized some of my grandfather's old furniture. The floor creaked under my boots. I opened the windows, letting in some air. I grabbed a broom to clear out the spider webs in the corners. Everything smelled like mold and old wood. I found the bedroom in the back and tossed my duffel bag on the bed. I settled in, figuring I'd rest for a couple of hours before exploring more. That first night I heard my name echo from outside. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. I had been half asleep, but the sound was so clear. It was just one word repeated twice. My name. It sounded distorted, like a voice speaking through a long tunnel. I stayed still, breathing fast. I waited. At first, I thought it was a dream, but then I heard it again from the direction of that old well. I got up, put on my boots, and grabbed a flashlight. I stepped out onto the porch. Everything was dark. The moon lit the yard, and I could see the vague shape of the well behind the shed. The wind had died down, so I stood there in total silence. I considered walking over, but something held me back. My chest felt tight, and I had this weird sense that I wasn't alone. But I saw nothing unusual, just the same old stones. I told myself it was just my imagination. I went back inside and locked the door. In the morning, I tried to laugh it off. I made some coffee and checked around the property in daylight. There was no sign that anyone had been there during the night. I noticed the chains around the well again. They looked secure, but now I was curious. I found a crowbar in the tool shed. I decided to remove some of the stones. I couldn't explain why, but I felt this strong urge to see inside. Maybe it was the voice I thought I heard. Maybe I just wanted to prove it was nothing. It took me a while to pry up the top stones and loosen the chains. They were rusted, so it wasn't easy. As soon as I removed a few stones, a blast of cold air hit my face. It made me catch my breath. The morning was warm, but the air from the well felt freezing. It smelled damp, like old soil and wet rock. I aimed my flashlight inside and saw a narrow hole descending into darkness. I shone the light around the interior wall. That's when I noticed symbols carved into the stone. They looked like shapes and lines I couldn't recognize. They circled the inner wall and rings all the way down. I decided to drop a small rock in there to see how deep it went. I didn't hear a splash. Instead, it hit something solid after a few seconds, and the sound echoed. There was no water. I decided I needed a closer look. The opening was big enough for me to climb inside if I moved a few more stones. My gut told me not to do it, but some strange curiosity pushed me on. I cleared more stones until the opening was wide enough to fit my shoulders. Inside there was a small landing and a stone staircase leading down. The steps looked old, worn, and they spiraled into darkness below. There was no way the property was tall enough to hide such depth. The well was maybe 8 or 9 feet across on the outside, but as I looked down, it seemed to go much deeper than I expected. My heart hammered. I gripped the edge with my free hand and started down. Each step felt solid under my boots, but I moved slowly, shining my flashlight over the walls. The symbols were everywhere, carved in neat rows. My flashlight beam caught bits of moisture glistening on the rock. The air kept getting colder as I went. I started shaking, not just from the drop in temperature, but from growing nerves. I had gone down maybe 20 steps when I realized I couldn't see the bottom yet. I looked up and saw the circle of daylight above me. It looked small now, like I had descended much farther than should be physically possible. My legs felt weak. I had this strange feeling of being watched. The hair on my arms stood up. My palms got sweaty around the flashlight. I heard a faint noise that sounded like breathing, but it wasn't mine. My breath was shallow and shaky. This sound was rhythmic, like something hidden in the darkness was drawing in air. I froze. I tried to steady the flashlight, but my hand was trembling. I called out a simple hello. My voice echoed, and then it died. No reply, but the feeling didn't leave. I kept going down, step by step. I lost track of time. My mind was focused on the flashlight's beam and the spiral of the stairs. The echo of my own footsteps felt strange, almost muted. I couldn't figure out how deep I was. The air was thick, and my ears felt pressure, like I was way below ground level. I became aware of my heartbeat pounding in my head. My throat was dry. I coughed a few times, trying to stay calm. Then I heard a whisper. It wasn't my name this time, it was just a low muttering, like someone speaking a few words I couldn't make out. I froze again, shining the flashlight in every direction. Just more stone walls and those carved symbols. They looked smoother, more detailed. Some had sharper lines, forming angles that made no sense to me. I looked up. The top was barely visible. It felt like I was inside a tall shaft. I wanted to turn back, but I also needed to see what was down there. My legs felt heavy. I knew I was close to panic, but I pushed myself to go a few more steps. The air turned colder the deeper I went. I could see my breath now. Small puffs of steam floated in front of the flashlight. I passed my hand over the wall and felt the rough texture of the carvings. They seemed to get more precise the lower I went, like the work of someone who spent a long time etching them. Then I heard that moaning sound again, the same one that had made me curious in the first place. It started low, almost like a distant wind. Then it grew louder, echoing in the tight space. My skin crawled. I gripped the flashlight so hard my knuckles ached. Something down there was alive, or at least moving. I felt my stomach twist. I told myself this was insane. There was no logical reason for this well to exist in this manner. It was too deep, too elaborate. But I kept going until the stairway opened into a small chamber. The walls in that space had the same carvings, but there were more of them crossing each other in patterns. My flashlight flickered. My breath caught in my throat. I slapped the flashlight a few times, and it steadied. The chamber had a low ceiling, and on the far side, there seemed to be another passage or corridor. I tried to see inside, but it was too dark. I didn't want to go any farther. I could feel my entire body shaking. My head started to pound, and I heard my own heartbeat in my ears. I realized I was sweating despite the freezing air. My chest felt tight. My mind kept telling me to go back, that this wasn't right, that I didn't belong here. But I took a few steps toward that passage. The ground felt uneven beneath my feet. My boots slid on a wet patch, and I had to catch myself against the wall. As I touched the wall, I felt those carvings under my fingertips. They felt sharp in some places, almost like tiny teeth in the rock. I pressed the flashlight forward. That corridor seemed to stretch out before me. I heard the moaning sound again, closer this time. It sounded like it was just around a corner calling me in. My heart pounded so loudly that I felt dizzy. I could sense that whatever was making that noise knew I was there. It felt hungry, like it wanted me to keep going. My arms felt numb and my back ached from crouching. I moved the beam across the corridor's entrance. I thought I saw a shape move, a dark shape that vanished the moment the light touched it. My throat tightened. I let out a small gasp and jerked the flashlight back. It could have been my eyes playing tricks in the dimness, but I wasn't sure. I stood there for a while, breathing in that stale, cold air. My thoughts kept jumping between curiosity and fear. I thought about what my grandfather might have known. Why did he never tell me about this? Why had he piled so many stones on top of the well and locked it with chains? It was obvious he wanted to keep it closed. Now I understood. There was something here that shouldn't be disturbed. My body felt pinned by a feeling of dread. Finally, I forced myself to turn around. My mind was screaming at me to leave. As I climbed back up, each step felt like a mile. My legs were sore. I kept looking over my shoulder. I thought I heard quiet footsteps behind me, matching my pace. But whenever I stopped to listen, there was only silence. The higher I went, the more I felt that presence pulling at me, almost as if it wanted me to return. I gritted my teeth and focused on the flashlight beam hitting the steps. My breath echoed in the well, and I tried not to imagine hands reaching out from behind. When I saw the circle of daylight above me, I felt a surge of relief. I climbed faster, stumbling on the last few steps. I crawled out of the opening and collapsed on the grass. My heart was hammering, and my lungs burned. The air outside felt hot compared to the cold below. I looked back down and saw nothing but darkness. I grabbed the stones and replaced them as best I could, but my hands were shaking so badly that it took a few tries to line them up. I didn't have the patience to reattach the chains the way they were before. I just piled them on top in a messy stack. My entire body was trembling, my shirt drenched in sweat. I backed away from the well, refusing to turn my back on it. I stared at the opening for a long time, half expecting something to crawl out, but it stayed silent. I fought the urge to run. Instead, I walked slowly toward the farmhouse, refusing to look away until I reached the door. Once inside, I locked everything and sat down in the old wooden chair near the fireplace. My breathing was still uneven. I could feel adrenaline leaving my body, replaced by exhaustion. I placed the flashlight on the table and stared at dust floating in the air. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat with my back against the door, listening for any sound outside. I kept imagining that moan, cold air, and those impossible symbols carved into the walls. My body felt tense every time the floor creaked. I jerked. The darkness of the house felt different now, like it was an extension of that endless pit outside. I tried to calm myself, but my chest felt heavy. I closed my eyes, but all I saw were those stairs leading down forever. By morning, I knew I wasn't staying any longer. I packed my things, left the farmhouse, and avoided looking toward the well as I walked to the truck. I climbed in, started the engine, and headed down the dirt road, feeling like I was leaving a piece of myself behind. My mind kept going back to that voice calling my name, freezing air, and the sense of something ancient waiting in the dark. I had no proof of anything, just the memory of every step on my skin. I gripped the steering wheel tight. My knuckles were white. I felt my pulse in my neck. A few miles down the road, I pulled over to catch my breath. My fingers were still trembling. The farm was out of sight, but I imagined it was there, silently holding that secret in its ground. I don't know if I'll ever go back. Part of me wonders what I left behind, what lies deeper in that corridor, and why my family kept it hidden for so long. Another part of me wants to forget it all, pretend it was a nightmare, but I can't shake the feeling that I opened something I shouldn't have. Now it's awake, and I keep waiting for the day I'll hear my name again, echoing from some distant darkness that might not be far enough away. I got the call on a Monday afternoon. The person on the other end of the line asked if I was still looking for overnight security work. I said yes before I even asked about the place. Then I found out it was the old Delacroix Historical Library on the far side of town. My first thought was that it sounded boring, but I needed the job. They told me to show up at 8 at night, meet the head archivist, and then start right away. I arrived at the library just before sunset. From the outside, it looked like a fortress made of dark stone. There were tall windows with iron bars. The front steps were worn in the middle. Inside, the smell was musty, like stale air mixed with old leather. I saw a bunch of shelves stretching from the front lobby all the way to the back walls. In the middle of the floor stood a circular desk, and behind it a small door led to some office area. The head archivist was a tall man with a stiff posture. His suit looked decades old, like something from a vintage store. He handed me a ring of keys and explained the basic routine. He told me I'd walk the halls hourly to make sure no one was trespassing. He also said the power sometimes went out, so I should keep a flashlight handy. He mentioned that the library contained valuable books, many of them centuries old, and that they needed extra security after hours. He spoke in a clipped voice, never smiling. He told me to focus on the reading room, the archives in the basement, and the special collections upstairs. He left around 9 p.m. I watched him exit through the front doors, lock them from outside, and disappear down the street. The place got quiet. The overhead lights buzzed softly, and I heard the distant hum of the heating system. I made a round through the main hall, walking past rows of shelves. The old floors creaked under my boots. Now and then, My flashlight beam caught little motes of dust swirling in the air. I kept hearing my own breathing echo off the high ceiling. After a few minutes, I realized I hadn't seen a single security camera around. Maybe the older parts of the building didn't have modern surveillance installed. Close to midnight, I sat at the front desk and browsed through a logbook of some kind. It listed items borrowed by researchers, overdue returns, and specialized requests. The pages were filled with handwriting I didn't recognize. Then I thought I heard a soft whisper. I spun around. The reading room lights flickered. Nobody was there, and it was silent again. I felt my heart speed up. I got up, took my flashlight, and started down one of the aisles. The shelves towered over me. Old spines lined every row. My footsteps sounded too loud in that space. I paused near a section labeled Rare Collections. This area had a locked gate, but I noticed it was slightly ajar. I used my keys to open it properly and went in. I saw books behind glass cases. Some of them were open, displaying handwritten notes or illustrations. I leaned closer and saw the edges of the pages trembling a bit, as if something vibrated under them. I told myself it might be the air conditioning, but the air felt still. Then I heard a sound like a page turning, very slow. I pointed my flashlight along the row of glass cases. Nothing moved. I kept going and eventually came across an open volume lying on a wooden stand. The page was covered in small script. I couldn't read all of it, but one margin note jumped out. It said, "They gather in the hush of night." The ink looked fresh, yet the style of handwriting felt old. I touched it, expecting wet ink, but the page was dry. My stomach twisted. I checked the publication date, printed. I flipped through more pages and found more notes in the margins, all in the same handwriting. Some were dated from the late 1800s, others had no date at all. I returned to the main desk, trying to shake off the feeling that something was off. I picked up the logbook again, hoping for a distraction. After a few minutes, I heard another sound, like quiet chanting. It was a repetitive murmur, hard to make out. I stood up and followed the noise toward the back stacks. Each step caused my pulse to jump. When I reached the end of the row, I saw a faint light under the door leading to the basement archives. I pulled out my keys again and opened the door, which led down a narrow stairway. The air grew colder as I went down. The stairs felt damp. I shone my flashlight along the concrete walls. Pipes ran along the ceiling, occasionally dripping water. The chanting got louder. It sounded like voices repeating short phrases, but I couldn't catch any actual words. At the bottom of the stairs, I found a long hallway with wooden shelves on either side. A single light bulb flickered at the far end. I took slow steps, my breath echoing. When I got to the end, I found a small reading area with a single table and a lamp. The lamp was on, but nobody was there. On the table sat a stack of books. One was open. There were notes in the margins in that same handwriting I'd seen upstairs. They mentioned entities that feed on the mind and whispers that slip through locked doors. My palms were sweaty. I flipped a few more pages. Each had some cryptic note about watchers, guardians, or hidden knowledge. The chanting continued, but I couldn't see where it came from. There was no other door in that room except the one behind me. I felt goosebumps all over my arms and neck. I decided to leave the basement. Halfway up the stairs, I heard the chanting stop. My heart pounded. I turned off the lamp, shut the door, and locked it. Back on the main floor, the library lights flickered again. The silence became heavier. Every step made me think someone was right behind me, but when I looked back, nothing was there. I returned to the main desk, checked my phone, and realized it was only 12. My shift would last until sunrise. The idea of spending 5 more hours alone in this building made my stomach churn. I took a slow walk through the reading room again. Rows of tables stood empty. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. I kept noticing the edges of books on nearby shelves moving slightly, as if they were being pulled outward and then pushed back. I leaned in close to one shelf and saw a thick leather-bound volume labeled in Latin. The cover twitched when I got near. I froze, my flashlight shaking in my hand. I reached out and touched the spine. It felt warm, like there was a pulse inside. I yanked my hand away. I hurried to the second floor using an old staircase with a wooden banister. Up there, the lights were dimmer. There were more shelves, more alcoves, and a locked door with a sign reading Special Collections. I tried the keys until I found the right one. Inside, the ceiling was lower, and there were locked glass cabinets in the center of the room. I saw ancient manuscripts on display, some in languages I didn't recognize. A musty smell filled my nose. My flashlight caught movement in the corner. I turned quickly. I thought I saw a shape slipping behind a cabinet. I called out, but no response. I walked around the cabinets, shining my light on the floor. My boots made a dull thud on the old boards. I felt something brush against my leg, and I jumped back, but there was nothing on the floor except dust. When I looked at the glass cabinet nearest to me, I saw my own reflection. Behind my reflection, though, I swore I saw a figure, a tall shape with a hood or cloak. I spun around, but no one was there. My heart hammered against my ribs. I noticed a small table in one corner, with more books stacked on top. One had a note sticking out. I opened it and read the margin note. If you see them, they see you. My mouth went dry. I shut the book, but I couldn't ignore the footsteps I suddenly heard outside the door. Steady, slow steps moved past the special collections room, then faded away. I locked up the cabinets and left. But the hallway was empty. My flashlight beam danced on the floor. I tried to keep my breathing under control, but my hands shook. I decided to circle back to the main desk. The overhead lights flickered again, and I heard the faint rustle of pages somewhere above me. I almost called out for whoever was there, but I couldn't find my voice. When I reached the desk, I saw that the logbook was open. It was open to a page I didn't remember looking at before. There was a single line written across the middle of the page in the same old handwriting. "We're listening." I closed that book and stood there for a while, trying to calm my nerves. I told myself to stick to the normal routine, to do regular rounds and to act like nothing was happening. I checked the front door. It was locked. The windows were also locked. There were no signs of forced entry. I looked outside but saw nothing except a dark, empty street. I flicked off the main lights and turned them on again, hoping to reset the flickering. It helped a little. Over the next hour, I kept moving, patrolling each aisle. I used my flashlight to check behind shelves. Sometimes I spotted faint shadows that shifted away when my light passed over them. Other times I heard that murmuring again, like a hushed conversation in a distant room. I never found anyone. My body felt tense, and I had a slight headache. I wondered if the library air was contaminated, or if I was imagining things. The notes I kept finding suggested something else was going on. They talked about entities that live in the thoughts of those who read too much. They feed on curiosity. They hide in silence. Around 2:30 in the morning, I headed back down the basement stairs because I wanted to see if anything had changed. The hallway was quiet, but the table lamp was on again. I remembered turning it off. I moved closer and saw more margin notes in the book on the table. One said, "Your thoughts are enough." I felt a chill run down my spine. The next page said, "You open the door. They are here." I slammed the book shut, turned off the lamp, and went back upstairs. In the main hall, I thought I felt the ground shift. Maybe it was just me, stumbling, but it felt like the floor rolled under my feet. I grabbed onto a shelf to steady myself. My head pounded. I forced myself to walk over to a row of reading tables. The lamps were still. The air was cold. I rubbed my arms to keep warm. Then I heard soft footfalls near the rare collections gate. I ran there, shining my light in every corner. The gate was locked like before. The glass cases inside were intact. But I saw one book lying open on a stand, turned to a page about mysterious watchers in ancient cathedrals. I walked around the stand looking for footprints or any sign of intrusion. I saw none, but the margin note on that page said, "They were always here. They never left." I felt a strong urge to leave, to walk out the front door and not come back. But I needed the job, so I clenched my teeth and stuck it out. I looked at my phone. It was just after 3 a.m. I decided to go outside for a minute to clear my head. But the front door wouldn't budge when I turned the key. I tried again, twisting harder. It felt stuck. I tugged a few more times until it finally clicked, and I heard a scraping sound. The door opened a crack. A gust of cold air hit my face. I breathed it in. I didn't see anyone around. The streetlights were dim. I shut the door and locked it again, telling myself I just had to survive a few more hours. I continued my routine. The next 2 hours were a blur of strange noises, flickering lights, and that sense of being watched. Each time I felt a presence, I turned around and saw only rows of old books. My mouth was dry and my hands felt clammy. I noticed the covers of certain books trembled when I passed by, as if they were breathing. My stomach tightened each time. and I tried not to look at them directly. By 5 a.m. I was worn out. My heart would race at every small sound. I felt the rush of blood in my ears. I tried to steady my breathing, but my thoughts spiraled. I replayed those margin notes, warnings about watchers, about how knowledge can become a trap, about how these entities feed on thoughts and questions. I wondered if I was losing it. I also wondered if these things were real. My head hurt, and my eyes stung. I was thirsty but didn't want to leave the main floor. I didn't trust the basement or the second floor anymore. Around 5:30 a.m., faint light started coming in through the windows. The sky was still dark, but I saw a hint of gray. I found a chair near the front desk and sat down, pressing my back against the wood. I kept my flashlight pointed at the main aisle. My legs were stiff, and my neck felt sore. I counted the minutes until sunrise. Now and then I heard that faint chanting again, coming from somewhere deep in the stacks. But I refused to go look. At 6 a.m., I heard the back door open. The archivist stepped in, carrying his briefcase. He looked at me, then glanced around. He asked if everything went smoothly. I didn't know what to say. I told him there were some odd noises, but nothing major. He just nodded. He didn't smile or comment on the flickering lights or the stuffy air. He didn't seem surprised by anything I said. I handed him the keys, walked out into the pale morning light, and felt the chill of dawn on my skin. The job wasn't what I expected. Something in that library felt alive. I don't know if it was just me or if it was real, but I know I felt watched. I found notes in books that dated back centuries. They had the same handwriting, the same warnings. And the entire time I was there, I heard pages turning, voices muttering, and felt the books tremble when I got too close. I don't know if I'll ever go back, but I can't shake the feeling that I brought something with me, something that lingered in my thoughts as I left that building. Maybe it just wanted me to tell this story, or maybe it wanted something else. I still haven't decided if I'll show up for my next shift. I haven't slept since I got home. Every time I close my eyes, I see shadows moving between shelves. I hear that low chant echoing in my head. And I remember those notes. They said these entities feed on thoughts. They said that reading about them, seeing them, gives them a way in. I don't want that knowledge anymore, but it's already there. And I'm not sure if anything will make it go away. All I can do is wait and see if tonight will be the same, or worse. I never thought an old typewriter could change the course of my life. I saw it in a thrift store on a Saturday afternoon. The thing was on a dusty shelf with a crooked price tag, surrounded by chipped vases and old lamps. I was looking for a spark, something that would help me break through the writer's block that had haunted me for months. The store smelled like damp cardboard. A small fan rattled on the counter. I stared at that machine for a while. Its keys looked worn, but I liked the shape of its metal frame. I paid for it on impulse and lugged it home without thinking about whether it worked. Back in my apartment, I placed it on my kitchen table. I remember the weight of it. My arms were tense from carrying it up 3 flights of stairs. I ran a finger across the keys and noticed old flecks of rust. The roller moved with a slight squeak when I turned the knob. I liked that squeak. It felt solid, like it had a history. I made some coffee, pulled out a stack of blank pages, and set them next to the machine. I had no idea what I would type, but I felt an urge to press those keys. That first day, I only typed a few words. The keys felt stiff, so I had to strike them hard. The letter E stuck a bit, so I tried to loosen it by pressing it over and over. I typed random letters to get a feel for everything. Eventually, I managed to produce 2 short sentences. They were ordinary lines about a guy walking in a dark street. I heard a metallic click when I finished. It was louder than I expected and sent a small jolt through my chest. It reminded me of a door slamming in an empty house, but more distant, like it came from inside the machine. I left the pages on the table and went to watch TV. That was my routine whenever I wrote anything. I liked to step away from it, then return after a while to see if it made sense. I sat on my couch and flipped through the channels. My phone buzzed with a message from an old friend, but I ignored it. I couldn't stop thinking about that loud click. It didn't sound normal. I got up and returned to the kitchen. The typewriter was there, silent. The page and roller had my half-written line about a man in a dark street. Everything seemed ordinary. I decided I was just tired. The next morning, I woke up with an odd feeling. My neck hurt, my shoulders felt stiff, and I had a hint of a headache. I wanted to write again, but I also felt uneasy about the typewriter. I ate a quick breakfast and sat down at the kitchen table. I placed my hands on the keys. My heart rate went up, but I tried not to think about that. I typed one line. It said something about a strange figure lurking behind a fence. Then I typed another line, describing a shape with glowing eyes. My palms started to sweat. I didn't know where those words came from. It didn't feel like I was writing. It felt like my hands were moving on their own. After I finished a paragraph, that strange metallic sound echoed. It was sharp and had a slight echo, like a scream at the bottom of a well. My chest tightened, and I had to take a deep breath. I looked at what I had typed. It was a short passage about a figure hiding in an alley, waiting for someone, whispering strange words. I blinked at the page because I had no memory of coming up with that description. I only remembered pressing the keys. I pulled the page out of the machine. I read it out loud. My voice sounded shaky. The text mentioned a flicker of movement near a broken streetlight. It talked about the scent of old leather and a shuffling sound on the pavement. The descriptions were vivid, but I didn't recall imagining them. My pulse pounded in my neck. I decided to leave the apartment and walk around the block to clear my head. Outside, the sky was gray. The air felt damp, and my jacket stuck to my arms. I walked past a few stores and headed down a quiet side street. A flickering streetlight caught my attention. It was broken on one side like the glass had cracked. A dull hum came from the old bulb. I remembered the line in my text about a broken streetlight. That coincidence made my stomach turn. I walked faster, trying to convince myself it was just random. I got back to my apartment with a slight chill. The typewriter was still on the table. I felt a mix of fear and curiosity. I sat down, took a fresh sheet of paper, and fed it into the roller. I wanted to test something. I typed a single line, a loud scrape on the window in the middle of the night. Right after I finished that line, the metallic sound burst from the typewriter. My whole body tensed. I shut my eyes for a second and breathed slowly. I pulled the page out, folded it, and stuck it in a drawer. I told myself I wouldn't look at it again. I wanted to see if that scrape would happen tonight, or if I was just going crazy. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I avoided the kitchen. I didn't want to be near that machine. I ate a plain sandwich for dinner, drank 2 cups of coffee, and watched TV in the dark. My mind wandered. I imagined what might happen if that line came true. I couldn't relax. Eventually I went to bed and tried to sleep. I tossed and turned for hours, staring at the ceiling. My eyes felt itchy, and my throat was dry. Around 2 a.m. I heard a faint scraping noise at my bedroom window. My heart hammered. I froze. The sound came again, a slow, dragging scratch across the glass. My arms broke out in goosebumps. I slid out of bed and tiptoed over to the window. I pulled back the curtain and saw a branch swaying in the wind. It was hitting my window at a weird angle. I exhaled hard and let out a short, shaky laugh. Then, I remembered the words I typed. My chest tightened again. The next morning I walked into the kitchen with a sense of dread. I stared at the typewriter. I told myself I should get rid of it, but my curiosity was stronger than my fear. I sat down, inserted another sheet of paper, and started typing. This time, the words flowed faster. They described apparitions, swirling shapes, and strange shadows that moved without light. My forehead beaded with sweat. My hands trembled, but I couldn't stop. After each paragraph, the machine made a metallic scream-like noise. It made me flinch every time. My jaw clenched, and my neck muscles felt tight. When I finished, I had 3 pages of text describing horrifying scenes, details about tall silhouettes outside a window, an odd whisper in a locked room, and a black stain spreading across a ceiling. I read it back and felt a cold tingling in my spine. I didn't know how these ideas got into my mind. I stood up, paced around the kitchen, and tried to control my breathing. I decided to see if any of those details would appear in my real world. So I went outside and looked at my building's exterior. Nothing seemed odd. I checked my own ceiling. It looked normal. I walked around the block again, peeking at windows and checking for silhouettes. Everything looked normal. I felt a small wave of relief. Maybe the typewriter's words wouldn't always come true. Maybe last night was just an unlucky coincidence. That evening, I sat on my couch with the pages in my hand. I read them again. Then I heard a faint scraping sound in the hallway. It sounded like someone dragging something heavy near my door. I jumped up and opened the door. Nobody was there, but I noticed a black scuff mark on the floor. It was wide and smeared as if something had scratched the tile. The hair on my arm stood on end. I went back inside, locked the door, and leaned against it. My heart pounded in my chest. I thought about the black stain in my text. That detail made me panic. I forced myself to calm down. I grabbed the typewriter, put it in a cardboard box, and carried it to my storage closet down the hall. I placed it on a shelf behind some old suitcases. I shut the door and returned to my apartment. I felt a little better knowing it wasn't in front of me anymore. For the next day or two, I avoided thinking about the typewriter. I tried writing on my laptop again, but the words didn't come. I felt restless. My shoulders ached and my back felt tight. My mind kept drifting back to the typewriter. On the third day, I woke up from a strange dream about missing pages and half-typed sentences. My forehead was damp with sweat. I decided to face the machine again. I went to the storage closet with my flashlight. The closet smelled like mothballs. My heartbeat sped up. I opened the door, and the typewriter sat there with a thin layer of dust. I grabbed it and carried it back to my apartment. My arm shook a little. I set it down on my kitchen table. I placed a new sheet of paper in the roller. My hands tingled with nervous energy. I started typing without planning any sentences. The words poured out about twisted creatures in corners and wet footprints in empty hallways. When I finished the first page, the typewriter released that clanging noise. It made me jump. I kept typing for another page. The story turned into something about a locked drawer with a hidden item. My breathing was shallow. I couldn't stop. By the time I finished, my fingers were stiff. I had typed 4 full pages. They detailed scenes of figures pressing their faces against windows, pressing their hands against locked doors, and tracing symbols on walls. I pulled out the pages and read them. Each paragraph felt like a warning, as if these things could appear in my own life at any moment. My stomach cramped. I looked around my apartment, half expecting to see a silhouette. My living room was quiet. The only sounds I heard were the hum of the fridge and the ticking of a small clock on the wall. That night I couldn't sleep. Around midnight I heard something tapping near my bathroom window. I got up, flicked on the light, and walked in. The tile felt cold under my feet. The window was closed, but I saw a few drops of water trailing down the glass. Something outside had brushed against the window. I peeked through the blinds. The alley behind my building was empty. My pulse was racing. I turned off the bathroom light and went back to bed, but I didn't sleep well. I kept hearing soft tapping sounds. My mouth was dry. My muscles felt weak. The next morning I rushed into the kitchen to see if the typewriter was still there. It was. I stared at it for a long time. My mind felt jumbled. I wanted to destroy it, but I also felt drawn to it. I couldn't stop thinking about how these typed details seemed to bleed into my reality. Maybe if I controlled what I wrote, I could steer the outcome. I loaded another page and started typing a scene where nothing happened. I wrote about a quiet morning with a gentle breeze and a peaceful atmosphere. I typed for about 10 minutes, describing a calm day with no unusual events. Then I stopped, waited for the metallic noise, and felt my heart slow down. The machine gave its usual shriek. My ears buzzed and my arms felt numb for a moment. I pulled out the paper and read what I wrote. It was short. I spent the rest of the day waiting to see if that calm morning would become real. But I was already living in that morning. Nothing alarming happened for the rest of the day. I felt a bit hopeful, like maybe I had cancelled out the creepy details with a normal scene. That evening, though, I heard a strange thump in my closet. I walked over and opened the door. My jackets were still, my shoes were in place, but one of the suitcases had shifted. It looked like it had been pulled forward a few inches. I examined it, but nothing stood out. I put it back, closed the door, and tried to keep my cool. Over the next few days, small things continued to happen. I found damp footprints in my hallway after a heavy rain, even though I had wiped my shoes. I heard soft whispers near my air vents when the heater turned on. I caught a glimpse of a figure in the corner of my eye when I passed a mirror, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. Each time, my heart would pound, and I'd feel a flush of heat in my face. I realized the typewriter wasn't just describing random horrors. It was shaping my environment. Or maybe it was revealing things that were already there. I tried to stop using it, but each night I dreamed about it. My dreams were full of frantic typing sounds and that metallic scream. My fingers itched to type again. Finally, I decided to confront it. I put in one last sheet of paper and started typing what I wanted my life to look like. I wrote about feeling safe and having peace in my apartment. I typed about normal days without mysterious shadows. I typed about clarity and quiet. My heart pounded so hard that I could feel the pulse in my temples. When I finished, the machine's metallic noise rang out again. It felt louder than before, like a jolt of electricity. My ears buzzed. I waited, staring at the blank walls of my kitchen, hoping I had ended it. For the rest of the night, I didn't hear any odd sounds. Slept without interruption. But when I woke up, there was a single line typed on a sheet in the roller. I didn't remember putting any paper in there. The line said, "It isn't over." My body tensed. The air felt heavy. I stepped back. My hands shook as I pulled out the paper. I stared at those words. My stomach dropped. I felt a cold sweat on my forehead. I realized I might never be free of this thing. I opened my closet, grabbed an empty duffel bag and stuffed the typewriter inside. I zipped it shut. Then I carried it downstairs and loaded it into my car. My plan was to drive somewhere far and get rid of it. I didn't care if I had to bury it in a junkyard. I just wanted it gone. I turned the key in my ignition, started driving, and forced myself not to look at the bag on the passenger seat. My hands were shaking and I kept swallowing hard to calm my nerves. As I drove out of my neighborhood, I noticed street lights flickering. I spotted a figure standing on a corner under one of those lights. I slowed down, but then the light steadied and the figure vanished. My chest felt tight. I hit the gas and sped up. I wanted to distance myself from everything I had typed. I wanted to believe that once the machine was gone, my life would return to normal. I don't know if it will, but I still remember the tension in my body and the look of that single typed line. I can pretend it never happened. I can't ignore the sounds I've heard or the shapes I've seen. Maybe throwing it away won't fix anything. Maybe I'll always feel those eyes on me in a dark hallway or hear those metallic shrieks when I'm alone at night. But I can't keep living with the machine in my home. I have to try. That's why I'm driving now, heading to an old landfill beyond the city limits. I don't know if this will work, but it's the only plan I have. My palms are sweating on the steering wheel, and my stomach is in knots. I just need to keep driving, in not looking back, in not slowing down, and not letting that machine pull me under again. I want my life back. I'm going to drop this thing and never see it again. But a small part of me can still hear the clicking of the keys, and a small part of me is afraid that wherever I leave it, it might find a way back. I first noticed the sound on a Wednesday night. I was in my living room, cleaning up after dinner, when a gentle tune caught my ear. I paused and listened. It was faint and soft, like it was coming from under the floorboards. The melody was slow, with a consistent pattern. I remember feeling a small chill at the base of my neck. I thought maybe I had left a radio on somewhere, but my entire house was silent. The only sound was that steady, eerie music underneath my feet. I crouched down and placed my ear against the floor. The tune got clearer. It sounded like instruments playing in unison, strings and a deep percussion that pulsed in steady beats. There was no reason for that sound to come from under a living room floor. I felt my heart thump faster. I stayed like that for maybe a few minutes, just listening, trying to place the source. Eventually I got up and walked around the room, tapping my foot on different sections. The sound was strongest near the center of the room. That night I decided to ignore it. I convinced myself it was some issue with the pipes or maybe an electrical hum. I tried turning the lights on and off. I tested the TV. I checked my phone. Nothing made the sound go away. It kept playing a persistent, steady rhythm like a slow march. When I went to bed, I could still hear it if I focused, but it was so quiet that I managed to fall asleep anyway. The next day, the sound was gone in the morning. I figured it was just some weird fluke. I went about my routine. Work was normal, and I forgot about it until I came home that evening. When I walked into the living room, I heard the same melody under the floor. It had the same slow rhythm but now felt clearer than before, as if it was beckoning me to come closer. I felt uneasy. My breathing got a bit shallow. My palms felt damp. I didn't understand where it was coming from. My house is old, built in the 1950s, but I had never experienced anything like that before. I grabbed a flashlight from my kitchen drawer. I moved the coffee table aside. I set the flashlight on the floor and got down on my hands and knees. I pressed my ear to the boards again. This time, the music sounded almost like it was right beneath me. separated by just a thin layer of wood. I knocked on the floor with my knuckles. I expected a dull thud, but I got a hollow echo. I wondered if there was a small crawl space or something underneath that I never knew about. I decided to look at the blueprint of the house, which was in a file cabinet. I spread it out on the dining table. The plans showed a basement, a living room, a kitchen, and 2 bedrooms. There was no mention of an extra space under the living room. I double-checked the scale. Everything seemed normal. I couldn't find any hidden rooms on the blueprint, but that hollow echo under the floor told me otherwise. When I returned to the living room, the music had changed tempo. It was still slow, but the percussion had become more pronounced. My heart pounded with each beat. My legs trembled a bit. My mouth felt dry. I tried to keep my hand steady as I shone the flashlight along the edges of the floor. I was looking for some gap or seam that might indicate a secret entrance. I found a few loose boards near the corner, but nothing that opened on its own. I realized I might have to remove the floorboards if I wanted to see what was underneath. That idea made me uncomfortable. I had owned this house for 5 years, and I had never considered tearing up the living room floor. The thought seemed drastic, but the sound was getting to me. The feeling of not knowing what was below made my chest tight. My breathing got heavier. I wiped sweat from my forehead and tried to clear my mind. I decided to do it. I grabbed a claw hammer from my garage. I chose the spot where the music sounded loudest. I began prying the nails free, one by one. Each nail squeaked and resisted. The wood creaked and splintered at its edges. The entire time, the melody continued like an audience waiting for my next move. Finally, I lifted a pair of boards. Beneath them, I saw a layer of dusty beams. Beyond that, there was an open space, maybe a foot of darkness. I could feel the cool air coming from it. The music intensified. It made my skin prickle. I brought the flashlight over and angled it downward. Between the beams, I could see something painted on the walls of a cramped chamber. The light was weak, but I could make out odd shapes in red and black. The lines looked jagged and disorganized. I had to pull more boards to get a better view. My heart pounded so hard that I could feel it in my ears. I tore up enough boards to create a small opening. Then I pointed the flashlight through the gap. There was a hidden room under my living room. It didn't appear on the plans. The ceiling was only about 4 feet high. The walls were covered with bizarre symbols. The paint looked old, cracked, and flaking. The symbols overlapped in some places. They looked random, but something about them made me feel uneasy. My pulse raced. The hair on my arm stood up. My forehead burned with sweat. The air smelled stale, like a basement that hadn't been opened in decades. I saw a small ladder attached to one wall. It looked handmade. The wood was uneven and darkened by time. I shined the flashlight around until I found a spot to climb down. The music was louder than ever. It pounded through my head in a steady, low tempo. My breathing grew faster. My hands shook a little as I grabbed the edges of the opening and lowered myself in. Inside that space, I barely stood on my knees. The floor was dirt, packed solid. The walls were close, almost claustrophobic. My flashlight flickered. The music echoed around me. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. It seemed to vibrate in my chest. My pulse matched the percussion. My stomach felt tight. My mouth tasted bitter. I shuffled forward, shining the light along the walls. There were symbols everywhere. Circles, triangles, lines that twisted in strange patterns. They reminded me of old runes I had seen in pictures, but I didn't recognize any specific meaning. They were painted in red, black, and a kind of chalky white. Some had dripped or smeared, others looked carefully drawn. The music rose and fell in a steady pattern. My ears felt pressurized, like I was underwater. I noticed small metal holders attached to the walls. They looked like candle holders, but there were no candles. Yet, I saw small flickers of light, like flames dancing in mid-air. I couldn't pinpoint the source. They moved in sync with the music, pulsing brighter when the percussion hit. My breath was ragged. My heart hammered in my chest. I couldn't figure out how there could be light without fire. My pulse raced with a sense of confusion. I reached out to see if I could feel any heat, but the air was cool. The walls felt rough and cold under my fingertips. The floor was damp, and my knees got dirty from the soil. The smell was musty, like a cellar. But there was another odor I couldn't identify. Something sharp that made me want to gag. The symbols seemed to close in on me. and my flashlight beam felt weaker. The music kept droning, never stopping, always pulsing in that slow, deep rhythm. I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. It was just a flicker of that strange light, but it made me jerk my head around. I lost my balance and almost hit my elbow on the wall. I steadied myself with one hand in the dirt. My breathing was rapid, and my throat felt tight. I had the strong urge to climb out right then, but some part of me wanted to see more. Something in me had to figure out what was making those sounds. I moved a few feet farther. My knees ached on the hard ground. The tune grew in intensity like it was building toward a climax. The percussion felt like a heartbeat. My own chest matched it. I pressed the flashlight against the far wall, and I saw a small alcove or indentation. It was about 2 feet deep, with symbols lining the inside. The floor of that alcove had a shiny object on it. It looked like a thin disc of metal, maybe brass or copper. I leaned closer. It was stuck when I tried to pick it up, making a scraping noise when I tugged on it. That noise rattled me. My heart fluttered in my chest. I let it go, deciding not to force it loose. The music was so loud then that I couldn't think straight. My hands shook violently. My forehead was soaked with sweat. My arms felt weak, like after too much exertion. The flickering lights were stronger, moving in synchronized patterns along the walls. There was no warmth from them, just an unsettling glow. I heard my own pulse in my ears. I wanted to leave, but my legs felt stiff and unresponsive. I forced myself to move. I turned around, grabbed the small ladder, and climbed back up. My arms trembled with each rung. I dragged myself out of that hidden chamber and collapsed onto the living room floor. My chest heaved. My face was hot. I just lay there for a few seconds listening to the heavy pounding of the music below. It didn't fade. It kept going, as if it were in my head now. My house felt different. The air felt heavy. My skin tingled. I stood up on shaky legs. My clothes were dirty. My knees were scratched from the floorboards and the dirt below. I was covered in a thin layer of dust. The living room light seemed harsh. My eyes struggled to adjust. That melody continued to seep through the opening I had created. I realized I felt drawn to it. Some urge pulled me back. I fought it. I paced around the room, trying to steady my breathing. I swallowed several times, trying to get rid of the dryness in my mouth. Eventually, I went to the kitchen for a glass of water. My hands trembled so much that I spilled some on the counter. I wiped it up, feeling restless. The music never stopped. Every minute or so, I glanced toward the living room. My heart kept racing. I wasn't sure what to do. I didn't want to go back down there, but the thought of leaving that hole open all night felt worse. I needed to cover it, at least temporarily. I grabbed some plywood and set it over the opening. I placed some heavy boxes on top to hold it in place. The music was still audible, but it was muffled. I spent that night on my couch, with the TV on, hoping the noise would distract me. The hidden melody pulsed underneath everything I watched. It followed me every time I got up. The sound was relentless. When I finally fell asleep, I had no idea how late it was. I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. The music was still there, droning. I had chills. My muscles felt tense, as if I had never truly relaxed. The next evening, I couldn't resist. I lifted the plywood and peered down into that space again. The music rushed up at me like a gust of cold air. My breathing turned ragged. My arms felt weak. I didn't want to go down, but I also felt a strange compulsion. I just stared into the darkness for a while. The flickering lights danced against the walls below. The air smelled stale and thick. I thought I sensed movement, but I couldn't be sure. I climbed down again more cautiously this time. My flashlight flickered. The slow pulse of that otherworldly melody rattled my nerves. My chest felt tight. My limbs trembled. I noticed that my watch had stopped. I couldn't tell how long I'd been down there. It might have been 5 minutes or an hour. The music seemed to distort any sense of time. I crawled to the spot with the shiny disc again. It was still there. I reached out, felt the metal, and sensed a faint vibration. I jerked my hand back. My heart pounded. The lights on the walls brightened and dimmed with each beat of the percussion. I heard a faint scraping noise behind me. I turned, sweeping my flashlight across the cramped space. Nothing moved. My ears felt like they were ringing. My eyes stung. That thick odor made me cough. My whole body was telling me to leave. The urge to escape became too strong. I crawled back to the ladder and climbed up. I pushed the plywood over the hole again, breathing hard. My shirt was soaked in sweat. My body shook. My hands felt numb. Now, whenever I walk across my living room floor, I feel the vibration of that strange melody. It never stops. It's quiet sometimes, but I can sense it. It's like something alive, a presence under my house that feeds on those dark chords. I don't know what it wants. I don't know if it's always been here or if it somehow found its way in. I only know that I hear it and I feel it. My arms get goosebumps even when I'm across the room. The lights flicker sometimes, and I wonder if it's coming from below. I haven't told anyone. I haven't boarded it up or tried to seal it. Part of me thinks it wouldn't matter. The sound is there, and the space is there, whether I acknowledge it or not. Each night I hear it in my dreams, with steady droning that drowns out everything else. When I'm awake, I feel it pull at me. Sometimes I stand in the living room, right above that chamber, and my heart beats in rhythm with the music. I feel sweat trickle down my back. My hands quiver. My breath catches in my throat. I wish I had never listened to that first note. I wish I had never torn up those boards, but it's too late now. The chamber below is part of my house, and I can't forget it. Every time I walk across the living room, I feel like there's an entire orchestra under my feet, playing a song that shouldn't exist. My nights are restless. My days feel incomplete. I know that if I go down again, it will be harder to return. That music wants me to join it. It wants me to below, in that tight space, surrounded by symbols and flickering lights. Sometimes I find myself standing over the opening, listening. My pulse aligns with the rhythm. My breath catches. My fingers itch to grab a tool and pry the floor open again. But I stop myself because I'm scared of what will happen if I give in. I don't know how to make it vanish. I don't know if it ever will. I just don't know. It just waits, humming in the depths below, feeding on every beat, calling me back for a concert that might never end. I just don't know. I don't know if it ever will.